Hey, welcome, Doovovid here. Shavua Tov. Sabbath just ending here in Detroit. Thought I'd stream again. A lot of information to cover and think about. I've been contemplating in my past streams, Ask the Rabbi, my number 6 and number 8 about half Jews and conversion, which were kind of like graduate seminars, related just me reading a bunch of material, kind of like a public study session. Although, in the future, hopefully that will be useful to people that are interested in this greater level of information. And I decided to do this one as a Ask the Rabbi instead of a public study session because, one thing I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers before Tuesday night for the Democratic election. So I figure I'd stream. Anyone, my new subscribers that has questions for me, I'd make it available to answer questions. And I finally got the conversion data off my desk, and I spent a long time researching that. And I'm going to pop that stream up real quick. I spent a lot of time researching that, and I had one other thing that I've been planning on streaming on for a long time. So I'm going to do that. Going to do that now. So let me enter screen share. We'll see if people show up. So I'll present my information right away, and if people show up, we'll make it a longer stream, and I'll answer whatever questions people have, and maybe even take some guests. But I have original information I want to present. So you can see I'm up to 955 subscribers. Thank God. Adam Green mentioned me again on Friday. I've been corresponding with him. Maybe we'll do more shows together, but I have a lot of subscribers coming from his show. So you see my Ask the Rabbi has been relatively one of my more popular streams. The last one was over a year ago, Ask the Rabbi number 1. And, the other ones, and I've had guests on it. Half Jews was a very long one. I did one on Zionism, and I did one on the Holocaust. I think those were important ones. I know more information over more research since I've done that. But, those were pretty good streams. Encourage people to watch those. Ask the Rabbi number 6 was more like a graduate seminar looking over complex papers, a lot of just reading and hours and hours of me reading. And I have a lot of interesting thoughts on the history, and we'll talk more about that before I get into this subject I'm going to be talking about today. This last one, I'm not sure what happened towards the end of the video. I start getting cut off, and my screen goes black and I get cut off. So the last view, but I went through the whole historical background. So let me just get a few things off this desk. So Plasma, been a while. Thanks for joining. Kol Nidra Oath, I'm not sure if you have any questions. So if you have a question, do an @Doovovid. So the conversion half Jew, it's an interesting, the history of what was it like in biblical times under the prophets, what was it like in the Second Temple period under the Romans, under the Greeks, and then what happened after the destruction of the temple versus when the majority of Judaism was in Europe till the modern day and the recreation of the state of Israel, and you can see the changing. So the Orthodox perspective might take a revisionist approach, trying to say it's always been the same, but it doesn't necessarily have to do that. Say we just follow the sages of the generation. Basically, the approach Israel is taking with the who is a Jew question. This is very complicated, and so this is an issue that I've hoped to have a lot of time to do research in. I'd actually studied linguistics in university for a few years, and I wasn't able to get a degree in it, but I originally considered getting a full degree in linguistics, and it didn't work out that way. So let's go into the topic at hand, which is the question. It's related to identity. Who are the Jewish people? In the early Bible, we're referred to as Hebrews, and the question is, from a theological perspective, is Hebrew like God's language? What was the language before the Tower of Babel? What language did the patriarchs speak? And then we'll look at the historic origin, and then from a metaphysical aspect, from a believing Jewish perspective, of looking at Hebrew as the origin of all language and possibly the truth of the Tower of Babel story. So let's just read quickly The verses in Genesis for the Tower of Babel, Genesis 11. Now the whole world had one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. They said to each other, "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They used brick instead of stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise we'll be scattered over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, "Is if one people speaking the same language, they've begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so they will not understand each other." So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. That is why it is called Babel, because there is a Lord confused the language of the whole world. From there the Lord scattered them over the face of the whole earth. And also the connection of so let me get through a little list quick plasma, and then I'll try to address your questions, because you post your questions in a way it's hard to understand if you're asking sincere questions. So from the biblical narrative, we have the flood story, Noah, his 3 children, and the understanding that Shem, Ham, and Japhet are the fathers of all the nations of the world. That's the origin of all of humanity is these tribes of Shem, Ham, and Japhet. Adam Green talking about the Noahide laws, the understanding that in Noah had an oath bound to God that all of his ancestors, meaning all of humanity, would follow these basic rules. And then these different children went out to different parts of the world and founded the different nations. And then after the Tower of Babel, these 70 nations spoke different languages. For people who are interested in like nationality, Luke Ford and ethno-nationalism, the connection between language and nation, as said the Hebrews. In the early Bible, the tribe of Israel was referred to as Hebrews, referred to by our language. But these etymologies and understandings of the origin of the world from biblical times, there's a lot of evidence on it. There's a lot of a lot of famous scholars in the ancient world wrote according to this. Until today, you'll find a lot of people, but it's related to what I'm going to be talking about. And let me just show a few of these charts, because you're going to see a divergence. I'm going to go over the origins of the alphabet system, where you're going to see that basically the modern current alphabet is largely based on Hebrew. So here's like one map of it. I'm going to show this much more in detail, but you can see like the Hebrew, the Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Daled, leading to the ABC, from the Greek Alpha, Beta, Gamma, pretty clearly coming historically from a Proto-Hebrew language. So that there was in the ancient world this understanding that yes, Hebrew was the origin of all language based on the alphabet. Although from a historical perspective, you say, okay, Hebrew might be the origin of the alphabets of the certainly the Western world. Although the claim now would be that Hebrew is not one of the older languages. So, example here, you have Hebrew coming in at about 1200 BC, possibly earlier at the time of Abraham. So according to the biblical chronology, after the Tower of Babel, Hebrew was lost from the world, besides for possibly Abraham, who preserves God's language, the Hebrew language. But that wouldn't be the current old age evolution understanding of the world, where you have other languages being much older. So here's another diagram showing predictions of the origins of these proto-languages, proto-Indo-European, Sanskrit type things, that archaeological evidence or the current understanding of world history would be much older than Hebrew, although the alphabet, there's substantial amount of direct evidence. So I'm going to show 2 more quick things, and I'm going to try to answer the questions in the chat. So this is interesting. This is William Chomsky, and if anyone has a guess in the chat who William Chomsky is, anyone have a guess who William Chomsky is? Okay, well, William Chomsky, if no response in the chat, is the father of Noam Chomsky, and people want the origin of the Hebrew language. This book was written in 1958, and he was a Hebrew scholar, a Zionist. The book was funded. Noam Chomsky might be famous now as an anti-Zionist, but he grew up as a Zionist. And this is an interesting history, the history of the Hebrew language, how it survived all these years, and then how it was revived. So there's a lot of different books on the subject. I have a few books I'm going to show, but anyone who wants, book on the subject here, this one's online from, I guess I got someone speaking German, der Uwigwa-Sprach, the Uwiga language. Yeah, there's some evidence. I might be talking about that, but that's not the main subject I want to cover. But I did have some language. But someone wants good book. Here's William Chomsky's Noam Chomsky's father. Here's another one, kind of like a scholar, Jeff Brenner, and he's got a book on the history, origin of the Hebrew language. And I'm going to go through a slideshow that has some of this stuff. And he goes through the the letters, some of the historical evidence, the origin of the Hebrew script till today, the pictorial history of likely hieroglyphics being switched to having sounds associated with letters, and that pictogram system eventually coming into Hebrew and then to the Latin script. And I have slides that include this. So let's look at the chat. Thank God we got a minion going. So plasma. People have asked about Kol Nidre before. I'm not sure if you have a direct question, what you want to know about Kol Nidre and Purim. If you want an explanation of the holidays or the rituals, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking. Are telling information on other Jews, Lashon Hora. Being a talebearer, Lashon Hora is bad speech, even if it's true. There's some differential between Lashon Hora between a Jew and a non-Jew, although Lashon Hora is not recommended to anybody about purpose, like a dual morality system. The laws of speech might be more strict to your fellow Jew, to your fellow Orthodox Jew, to your family member, to someone you pray with, as opposed to a non-Jew, but these are generic laws that apply to everybody. I think my Ask the Rabbi number 2 was on Lashon Hora, so I encourage you to watch that. So I'm not sure if you're asking about general Jewish behavior. So in plasma, you have to, I'm not sure. I mean, if you think because I have a dual moral system, you can't trust anything that I'm saying, I think still a large amount of information you could trust is just a pure giving over of information, although there might be other information that I'm not going to convey. Something network. Did the Romans invent the myth of Jesus to fill the prophecy? The prophets of the Jews would convert to Christianity. That's unlikely. So hopefully there'll be more time for historical streams about the nature of the Romans. And I was looking into like Pompeii and Nero and the burning of Rome and the blaming on Christians and possibly Jewish conspiracies to have the burning blamed on Rome and Caligula, possibly Philo Alexander, who was brought before Caligula, conspiring to have Caligula assassinated. And the origins of Christianity are a topic probably for a different stream, although if you have more direct questions, I'll try to address them. Plasma, cognitive empathy without sympathy, since you are aware of the destruction, deceptions to other. I mean, it's possible that, saying that there's sympathy for people of the natural, of their own kind, but there's, more just a cognitive empathy for people of a different kind. So I'm not sure exactly what your points. I'm not sure if plasma, if you're actually asking me questions or you're just airing your critiques of the Jews. So I'm trying to see what you're saying, and we've discussed this like a group evolutionary strategy, and if you mean something unique to the Jewish people or something that would be factual about all group evolutionary strategies. So Duskona Neyavard, I'm not sure where you're coming from. Ich rede Yiddish, ich kenne ein bisschen Deutsch. I went to school in Yiddish. I know a little bit of German. Generally the Jewish people, Yiddish were Germanic centered. Now there's more an Anglo centering. And Josh, thanks for joining. Yeah, Plasma, I'm not really sure. You're not asking your questions clearly, and it seems like you're just airing your critiques rather than asking question. Troy, have you ever done your own personal family lineage? Would you be able to trace it back to Abraham? So I have family trees going back a good few hundred years. I'm not sure if I would be able to trace it back to Abraham. I know in legend, we trace back to the tribe of Benjamin from certain parts of our family, although I'm not sure if we have an actual written, documented family tree. My mother's done 23andMe. I have like actually family trees, like a whole book going back pages and pages and well-known going back a few hundred years. Although origin going back past a few hundred years, there might be branches that are more well-known. I hope to look more into that, and it could involve traveling to Europe and going to graveyards, which I haven't been able to do. Yeah, so I don't know if Plasma wants to come on and ask direct questions. I mean, you're generally kind of a hard guy to speak to. So um, let me go back into my presentation and finish my presentation. It's not that another 20 minutes or so. If you want to, hear this interesting stuff about the origin of language, I encourage you to stick around. And if not, you could come back. You could just see I'll be streaming. Come back and ask your questions later. Maybe I'll be able to let you join. But I want to at least cover my information because I'm not exactly sure if the type of questions you're going to ask, if they're so to say in good faith, if it's more you're just airing your general grievances, or you have legitimate questions. So let me jump into some of these presentations that I have. So here is pretty interesting history of the alphabet. I found a slideshow to show this concept of the alphabet representing sounds. So you had the earliest systems were pictograms, or like Sumerian, which definitely goes back, and the origins. You have hieroglyphics that were pictures representing words, although then later it's assumed that quite a bit of the pictograms represented a sound. So you had words, and the pictures could represent concepts or ideas, but they also represented sounds. And if anyone has studied hieroglyphics, some examples of different pictures that are found. And I have books or courses on hieroglyphics, and you could actually study for just a few hours and pick out numerous of these pictograms that appear all over in hieroglyphics. It's an interesting thing. I encourage people to learn a little bit more about it. So here you have like the basis of an alphabet, of a syllabic script with different syllables represented by different pictures. You have mnemonic devices, and generally there were only consonants, and as the Semitic origin of language, the representation of sounds was only the consonants, and the vowels were not written, as opposed to, we'll see later how that comes into the Western alphabets when the derivation. So if you take the biblical narrative and the origins of Hebrew, in the creation of the alphabet, you have this early Phoenician. So the earliest historical records are actually Phoenician. So according to what we're going to be talking about, Edenics, the assumption is that Hebrew is the origin, although from the evidence of archaeology and history, they would generally go with like a Proto-Phoenician. And there you have the alpha bait, like in Hebrew, aleph base is the ABCs, because aleph is the first letter, then base, and they represented certain figures. So aleph represented ox, and bait represented house, and the origin of the original Hebrew script is different. We'll see the transformation of how the Hebrew letters we see today from the earliest evidence that existed. So here's a nice background for the earliest times. You have the early Phoenician, Moabite, Hebrew. So according to the archaeological record, you have early Phoenician, Moabite, and then Hebrew. So with the religious assumption is going to assume that Hebrew is the origin, although the evidence doesn't support that. You have Aramaic, later, and you could see kind of, to where you have the current Hebrew system of Aleph, Base, Gimel, Dalet, Hey. that's later going to correspond to the Western alphabet of A, B, G, D, or it gets rearranged. But you could see history of this script where you see that the Western alphabet is largely directly derivative of the Hebrew alphabet. So here's another origin we call the Sinaitic Hebrew that might be how on Mount Sinai or the Ten Commandments, the form that the letters may have appeared to now how they might appear in English. And it's interesting. That book I showed earlier from Brenner has a lot of these. I'm going to show more about the origin of this. It's interesting. So when the Greeks took the language, they do two things. One thing, they get rid of some of like the silent letters. Like Hebrew was the Arabic type language that had a lot of guttural, breathy type letters, and like people know Arabic, and so they get rid of some letters. They add some letters, and they create some consonants. So, it's not a direct correspondence of aleph base to the ABCs today, but there's quite a bit of historical evidence. Saying they replaced what they considered useless letters and changed them into vowels. So from the Western perspective, there's two great pivotal moments, the devising the consonantal alphabet on the acrophonic basis in the early second millennium, and the addition of vowels to the consonantal repertoire in the early part of the first millennium. The first of these steps forward, it's unclear who did it, if they're Palestinian, Phoenicians, Syrians, Hebrews, and the second is the Greeks. And Hebrew was done left to right, right to left, as opposed to the Western systems that were mostly left to right. Also interesting, the Etruscans appear to be the first Europeans to have an alphabet, and he's saying that the Etruscan alphabet is pretty clearly a derivative of these Sinaitic Hebraic alphabets. And you could look into the exact details of the letters and the history. It's pretty interesting. I'm going to look into a different aspect of it. Okay, so thank God I got 26 people watching. So let me go back and answer some questions. I'm trying to hit 1,000 subscribers. So if anyone is regular viewer of my channel or wants to help me reach 1,000 subscribers so I could stream more, please share. Let me try to be interactive with the chat. I have a few more things, and then possibly thanks, Brundle, for coming on. I'll talk about Chabad. Let me finish my presentation, and then if people want to know about the origins of Chabad, okay. So let me finish my presentation, maybe another 15 minutes, and I'll talk about Chabad. So, this is interesting. No, I didn't make any of these slides. I found them off the internet. If I had more time, so let me finish these presentations, and then I'll try to be more interactive. And if there's anyone who knows more about this and wants to, share their information or research, that'd be great. So here are some more slides. I'm going to make this full screen. Some of these were from the book I showed earlier. So Hebrew belongs to the Canaanite group of all languages. In turn, the Canaanite languages are a branch of the Northwest Semitic family of languages. According to the scholar who Hebrew flourished as a language spoken in the kingdoms of Israel and Judah during about 1200 to 586 BCE. Scholars debate the degree to which Hebrew was spoken vernacular in ancient times following the Babylonian exile, when the predominant international language of the world was Old Aramaic. Hebrew was nearly extinct as a spoken language by late antiquity, but it continued to be used as literary language and as the liturgical language of Judaism, evolving various dialects of literary medieval Hebrew until its revival as a spoken language of the late 19th century. The Gezer calendar, which I showed Noam Chomsky's book, if anyone wants a complete history of Hebrew from its origins till today, Noam Chomsky's father, William Chomsky, I put that book link in the chat at the beginning. So the Gezer calendar also dates back to the 10th century BCE, at the beginning of the monarchic period, the traditional time of the reign of King David and Solomon. Classified as archaic biblical Hebrew, the calendar presents a list of seasons and related agricultural activities. Gezer calendar, named after the city whose proximity was found, was written in Old Semitic script akin to the Phoenician, one that through the Greeks and Etruscans later became the Roman script. Gezer calendar is written without any vowels, and it does not use consonants to imply vowels, even in the places where later Hebrew spelling requires it. Then you have the Shebna inscription found on the tomb of the royal Stuart, found in Siloam, dated the 7th century BC. Numerous older tablets have been found in the region with similar scripts written on other Semitic languages, for example, Proto-Sinaitic. It is believed that the original shapes of the scripts go back to the Egyptian hieroglyphics, though the phonetic values are instead inspired by the acrophonic principle. The common ancestor of Hebrew and Phoenician is called Canaanite, and was the first to use a Semitic alphabet distinct from Egyptian. Other ancient documents is the famous Moabite stone written in the Moabite dialect, the Siloam inscription found near Jerusalem. It is an early example of Hebrew. Less ancient samples of archaic Hebrew include the Astraka found near Lysic, which describes events preceding the final capture of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian captivity. In the widest sense, biblical Hebrew means the spoken language of ancient Israel flourishing between the 10th century BCE and the turn of the 4th century CE. It comprises several evolving and overlapping dialects. The phases of classical Hebrew are often named after important literary works associated with them. So there's more history. I'm not going to read all this. I'll put this in the chat, but I'm going to show some of this ancient inscriptions. So let me add this to the chat. So if anyone wants to read this, I encourage them to read this on their own. And then let's look at some of these early inscriptions. So this is one of the earliest 3,000-year-old pottery shard with 5 lines of text, the oldest Hebrew writing ever found. It's written in the Proto-Canaanite script. And its lines possibly related to King David. Then you have the Siloam tunnel inscription that has passages similar to that in Kings. In Heskiah's tunnel in the Gilon Springs, people know that in Jerusalem, you had the walled city, which was originally a Canaanite city, and there was a natural springs under the city, and King Heskiah built tunnels under, and those are still around today. And so there's inscription in them, and it has this Paleo-Hebrew alphabet. And then after that, you have in other parts of Israel, broken pot that appear to have verses similar to Exodus about legal matters. More history. So I encourage people who want to, interested in this, to read through. By the time later Bar Kokhba, you have in the later periods of the Second Temple, after the Second Temple, mainly with Bar Kokhba, and the small period of time where the Romans were overthrown, you have quite a bit of Hebrew script. But that's that on coins, that's also a different Hebrew script than the one used today. So here's some manuscripts. The Silver Scroll, 6th century BC. This has the priestly blessings of the Kohanim that's still said today. Yivarecha Hashem Yishmerecha. If anyone goes to synagogue on the high holidays and the people have lineage from the Kohanim, they still say this today. So the earliest recording of this, and you could see the script here, I guess it's in silver. This is an early example of the Greek translation of the Bible. The Dead Sea Scrolls, a whole bunch of them from estimated 300 BC to 70 CE. The Nash Papyrus. You also have the Nag Hammadi. You have the Samaritan Pentateuch, books of Moses. There's differences. The Samaritan Bible, also known as the Samaritan Torah, is a manuscript of the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, written in the Samaritan alphabet and used as scripture by the Samaritans. Some 6,000 differences exist between the Samaritan and Masoretic text. Most are minor variations in the spelling of words or grammatical constructions, but it involves significant semantic changes, such as the uniquely Samaritan commandment to construct an altar on Mount Gerizim. Nearly 2,000 of these textual variations agree with the Koine Greek Septuagint, and some are shared with the Latin Vulgate. So very interesting. The Wadi manuscripts also found in caves recently. The Syrio-Aramaic scripts, these are already 5th to 12th century CE. To later, where you have the origins of the first Bible. Here you can see the Syriac as opposed to the Hebrew, the different alphabet, the Cairo-Geniza, including stuff from Maimonides, which was also found recently in the last decade. The Aleppo Codex, one of the earliest known Hebrew Masoretic texts of the books of Moses. It's considered the authoritative, which almost every synagogue today has this version. Here's a note on, so to say, the difference between Hebrew and Greek, where Greek is more descriptive and Hebrew is more prescriptive, where Hebrew is more describing what the use of the thing is where Greek more describes the thing itself, the change of the letters. And then here's some of the origin, like the letters. So you look at Aleph, some of the original from being an ox head to Proto-Semitic to the letter that we use today. And so people want to know more about it. This goes through all the different letters. So I encourage people to look through that. Okay, so let me check the chat. Okay, Ben Noack, thanks for showing up. Okay, so I got a little more to present on this. Da Messenger is here. So let me go back. Daniel D, thanks for joining. Let you and Plasma hack it out in the chat. Bob Peterson, thanks for joining. Yeah, I mean, Josh Randall asking, do you consider the Phoenician records to be the earliest records or the earliest known? So that would be the archaeological record according to the current science of archaeology that would say that, although I'm going to get into the biblical understanding. That's the main thing I want to present. So first I'm just showing the overall scholarships. I readings from one more article that I put. This will give more what I want to talk about today. So this is a scholarly article, and I'll just read a very brief part at the end. But this is the primeval language of Hebrew ethnicity in ancient Jewish and Christian thought until Augustine. Article describes the Jewish and Christian ideas of the identity of the primeval language, defined as a language spoken from the creation to the Tower of Babel, in relation to these ideas with different concepts of Hebrew ethnicity in ancient thought. Accordingly, this article does not deal with the later topic as a separate one. So the article serves a threefold purpose: to explore and describe the different positions in ancient Jewish and Christian Bible exegesis and apologetics in the topic of the primeval language, to explain how the claim in this topic were justified or substantiated, to investigate to what extent the Jewish or Christian positions are consistent with each other and to what extent they diverge from each other. It charts the development between Hellenistic Judaism and Augustine in terms of the identifications of the primordial language and their accompanying arguments. Also, the concept of the Hebrew ethnicity, like as Abraham referred to as a Hebrew, or even Moses refers to himself as a Hebrew. Until today, like the Hebrew Society, a lot of early synagogues in America were referred to as the Hebrew congregation, as opposed to the word Judah, which is a geographic signifier. Hebrew is a language signifier for the people interested in ethnicity and race and nationalism. Where does the part of language fall into that? So there's a lot of information. He covers the origin of the scholarship on the issue, and then goes through an overview of quite a bit of the scholarship from ancient times till Augustine. And just to keep this shorter, I'm just going to read the summary. So in the historiography of linguistic thought, it is well known that the Hebrew language held the position as the original or primeval language of mankind in Western thought from antiquity until the middle of the 18th century. How this idea originated and developed during antiquity is the subject of this article. In ancient thought, this idea was also related to different concepts of Hebrew ethnicity. For this reason, the article combines the exploration of the historical development of the idea in question with inquiries into the contiguous topic of Hebrew ethnicity. A joint exploration of both of these topics and their historical development in antiquity has not been undertaken in previous research, although there are a number of separate investigations of either of these topics. Section 1.3 gives a survey of the state of the research. The topic of the primeval language was handed down from antiquity to medieval and early modern Western thought and discourse in order to provide with a comprehensive grasp of the vicissitudes of this reception. The article begins with an introductory survey of this intellectual historical process. The second part of this article contains the exploration of the above-mentioned topics in ancient Jewish and Christian thought. The second part follows a certain outline, the Bible on the primeval language of and Hebrew ethnicity, ancient Jewish exegesis on these topics, ancient patristic exegesis on the same topics, and Augustine's position on the same topics. Second chapter describes the basis for forming ideas on the topics of primeval language and Hebrew ethnicity in antiquity. It is divided into two sections. Section 2.1 describes the contents of Genesis, an important fact that the Bible does not raise the question of the identity of the original language of mankind, but reports that it is disintegrated by being confused at Babel, an event that also marks the emergence of different ethnicities and different languages. Section 2.2 deals with the terminology regarding Hebrew ethnicity in the Old Testament. The biblical use of the ethnic term Hebrew is described in its occurrence in Genesis 14:13. It has traditionally been interpreted either as a patronymic or appellative noun. Third chapter explores how the conceptualization of the original language and Hebrew ethnicity developed in post-biblical ancient Judaism. Section 3.1 explores the emergence of the Hellenistic Judaism of the idea that Hebrew is the language of creation, and Section 3.2 charts how this idea was asserted in rabbinic literature. Such claims occur in Hellenistic Jewish writings such as the Book of Jubilees, the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, an exposition on the Patriarchs, and late ancient rabbinic exegetical thought in the commentaries such as Midrash Bereshit Rabbah and Midrash Tanhuma, and the Jewish Aramaic Bible translations. In early rabbinic Judaism, the same idea competed with the claim that Aramaic was the language of Adam. 3.3 deals with the ancient Jewish dating of the confusion of languages. Final section deals with the ancient rabbinic interpretation of the etymology of the ethnic term Hebrew. Fourth chapter maps out how the primeval language and the Hebrew ethnicity was conceived in the patristic exegesis of apologetics in antiquity. This four sections, after introductory remarks on the exegetical preconditions for the patristic discussion on topics under consideration, the article goes on to explain the emergence of a church theological or ecclesiastical reading of Genesis, story of the Tower of Babel. Next section, how Christian apologists in late antiquity, Eusebius of Caesarea, found new concept of Hebrew ethnicity in his works. He argued that Christianity is a restoration of the ethnicity of the ancient Hebrews and their theological and way of life. They lived before their descendants degenerated to the nation of the Jews in Egypt. Eusebius links the Hebrews to Aber, the son of Shem, according to its allegorical interpretation in the sense of the appellative, so that the ancient Hebrews, in Eusebius' opinion, became proto-Christians. Next section explores all the attested ecclesiastical writers advocating the primeval status of the Hebrew, except Augustine, to whom a very special survey is devoted. Three prominent church fathers, Origen, Ambrose Giaster, and John Chrysostom, turn out to be the representatives of three different patristic approaches to the subject in question. They did not share the same arguments in claiming that Hebrew was the original language. Origen transmits the common rabbinic exegesis. Abraham remained in the Lord's portion at the confusion of languages, and therefore he was not subjected to the language created influence of the 70 angels of nations who impressed new languages of the 70 nations of the world. Moreover, it is shown how Origen defends the primordial of Hebrew in polemics with the pagan philosopher Celsus. In comparison, Jerome, the author of the Pseudo-Clementine, can be regarded as belonging to the same category as Origen, since both of them only transmit the common Jewish exegetical tradition on the topic in question. Ambrose Ciaster follows Hellenistic Jewish arguments and might have been acquainted with the Book of Jubilees, but he extends his arguments beyond the same. Since he takes a Christian Jewish approach, Ambrose Ciaster retraces the religious and linguistic identity of Jewish people or nation to Abraham, at the same time as his non-knowledge of Hebrew allows him to free scope for etymological speculation on the origin of the ethnic and linguistic term Hebrew. His conclusion is that it derives from the proper name Abraham. John Christensen follows a Christian exegetical tradition in which Aber was considered to have preserved the primeval language. This tradition does evidently not derive from Jewish thought, since Abraham played the same part in ancient Jewish exegesis as Aber is attributed in Christian exegesis. Christendom moralizes the preservation of the original language in order to represent it as a reminder of the action of folly that resulted in the confusion of language. The purpose of claiming Hebrew to be the primordial language accordingly differs from the ancient Jewish purpose. So the next section demonstrates the Aber-focused exegesis concerning the preservation of the primeval language, spread in late ancient patristic thought after Christian Chrysostom. The primacy of Aber, the phrase obviously occurs already in Ambrosius' polemics, was taken for granted by Jordanes in his world history. Aber's primacy is pinpointed as a chronological milestone. The Aber eponymy and the recognition of Aber as the preserver of the original language and themes encountered in Procopius of Gaza, Cassiodori, Isidore of Seville, and Augustine. Similar line of argument can be found in Claudius Marinus Victorius, who lays more emphasis on shame than Aber. And true religion and the worship of the true God saved Sham's descendants from the confusion of language and enabled them to keep the ancient primeval language in a world of ethno-linguistic diversity. Final section, chapter 4, is devoted to the opponents of the Hebrew hypothesis in late antiquity, Gregory, Theodoret, and the exegetal successors in Syria of Ephraim in Syrian. Gregory pursued a philosophical and theological polemic debate with Eunomius, an Arian bishop, who had taken up a naturalistic Cratylenian language philosophy according to which words and the things being signified are ontologically interconnected. On this ground, Eunomius had claimed that Hebrew was the language of creation. At the same time as God created the things, he also created their words. Gregory of Nyssa opposed this reasoning. From a linguistics conventionalist point of view, God's language is a sign of his divine will. Human languages are found to be used by particular nations, and when God created the world, there were no nations. So Theodorus opposes the Aber eponymy of the ethnic term Hebrews by the reason that many other nations descend from Aber without being called Hebrews. For instance, the Edomites, the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Syrians, and all the descendants of Abraham through his second wife Keturah. Theodorus joins Septuagint's interpretation of the term Hebrew as an appellative noun. He also put forward linguistic evidence for considered Syriac the most ancient language, namely the proper names of persons in primeval times. His favor of Syriac reflects the language situation in the Near East in his own time, and he seems to project that situation into the linguistic past of the Near East. The author of Caves of Treasure shares the social linguistic point of departure with Theodorus Sirius, with underlining the Syriac and the queen of all language. The last chapter in the article deals with Augustine of Hippo, more accurately his position on the topic of the primeval language and Hebrew ethnicity. This chapter is divided into 8 sections. Augustine's statement in the commentary in Genesis, written about 400 AD. Augustine refrains from dealing with the question of the identity of Adam's language. Augustine joins the continuity of City of God with the preservation of the primeval language in his mature work, The City of God. In expounding on the Tower of Babel, Augustine interprets the Son of Men in referring to Ciutas Terrena, the earthly city, and perceives Aber as a representative of the earthly city, the city of God at the time of the building of Babel. Aber did not take part in the ungodly enterprise and was exempted from the confusion of language. Thus, he retained the primeval language, which afterwards was distinguished as Hebrew after himself and handed down in a certain line of generations leading down to Abraham and the nation of Israel. In ancient patristic thought before Augustine, the idea that primeval language was preserved in the house of Aber is to be found only in Diodorus and Tarsus, and John Christendom, Claudius Mars, and Victorius. We encounter the same argument in Augustine. Next section tries to explain how Augustine's identification of Hebrew with the original language is based on his innovative exegesis. Augustine arrived at his conclusion by an innovative series of exegetical links. The statement that Babel was built by the sons of men is a proof of the distinction between the godly and ungodly. In turn, Augustine interlinks this with his theory of history, the antithesis between the city of man and the city of God. By this interconnection, Augustine argues that the confusion of language only struck the ungodly builders of Babel, while the pious family of Aber, who then embodied the city of God, was exempted from such punishment. In this way, the old idea of the supreme antiquity of Hebrew was integrated in eschatological views of the continuity and unity of the city of God, which identifies with the Christian church through history. In the section 5.4, Augustine's views on the Hebrew ethnicity and demonstrates how he connects the Hebrew identity of the primeval language with the historical person and patriarch Aber. Hebrew ethnicity, in turn, in Augustine's conceptions, out to have linguistics and religious aspects. It is not the case in his early theology, in which the Abraham is vindicated as an eponym of the ethnic term Hebrew. In preferring the Abrahamic eponymy, Augustine was influenced by Ambrosiaster. Section 5.5 describes how Augustine identification of the primeval language with Hebrew was related to his views of the cultural transmission of philosophy and the wisdom between the nations of the ancient world. His views on the key role of the ancient Hebrews in the process clearly guide his view on the primordial status of Hebrew. Of the remaining sections, section 5.6 traces out how Augustine's doctrine of world ages and is related to his views on the primeval linguistic past. Section 5.7 deals with Augustine's ideas of the 72 languages came into being at the confusion of Babel and explains how Augustine accepts the nation family of Aber and Peleg from the original language division. And the last section deals with Augustine's knowledge of the relationship between Punic and Hebrew. So this was actually written in Finland, and I'm going to be showing the work of Professor Isaac Mozeson, which is very interesting. So let me stop the screen share, and we'll have time to directly interact with the chat if there's interest. So that was the main part I wanted to show, and I will be going through the work of Professor Mozeson. So let me show these two books here. So here's a book on the language of the Jews, a social linguistic history, showing where Jews have lived and the languages we spoke, and kind of like using non-Jewish languages with Hebrew letters. And Deshaun calling, hello. Yeah, I'm streaming now. If you want, I'll call you back in a bit. I'm live now. Okay, so this book by Professor Mozeson, and I'm going to be showing his work. I have thousands of pages of his research, and he's got the origin of species, intelligent design in language. So I'm going to put this back on my shelf, and I'm going to be going substantially in depth to his research, and I would like to continue in his research. So Professor Mozeson is taking this approach, which he calls Edenics, that Hebrew is the origin of all languages. Hebrew is God's languages, and using the modern tool of linguistics, you could demonstrate Hebrew as the language of God in even the historical origin of all the other languages, which might be slightly different than the approaches. So that paper I read is pretty interesting. So I'm not sure if look for the chat. If anyone wants to come on, could do an @Doooovid and we could discuss different topics. Otherwise, I'm going to go into trying to give a direct showing of some of Professor Moseson's research, and I have a lot of it. He gave me thousands of pages of his research, and very interesting things on word origins, connecting similarities between different languages, and he's working from this perspective. So I put this in Ask the Rabbi as opposed to a public study session, because this is pretty much part of Jewish theology that Hebrew is the language of God. Hebrew is how God created the world. If possibly from an anthropological perspective, maybe Hebrew is the language that God thinks in, or from even Noam Chomsky's like a universal grammar. From a greater perspective, or a person prays Kabbalistic understandings of causing effect in the world by the power of Hebrew prayers that are not, the Talmud talks at length about the difference between prayer that's uttered in Hebrew versus other languages. And, so the historical, so like Brundlefly, for example, we have our Christian evangelicals, So Ecce here. So I'm doing the plasma. I guess if I'm not going to get too many trolls, I could consider putting the link directly in the chat. So, I want to keep this more intellectual. So, like, I don't really want to turn my Ask the Rabbi into just a stream with a bunch of people who want to air their grievances on Judaism. But I'll risk just putting the link in the chat. The children of the Amalekites subject to the punishment of the Amalekites. That's a dispute according to Maimonides. That's only if they don't change their ways, that first they're given a chance to repent. And based on the verse says, Timchas Zeker Amalek, you should erase the memory of Amalek. And interesting on conversion and intermarriage, the connection that Amalek comes from a tribe that wanted to intermarry with the Jewish people and was rejected, and then later breeds with enemies, so to say, of Israel, and forms this tribe, although some of the descendants of Haman do go on to convert to Judaism. Well, this is generic, whether you're Christian, Jewish, or Muslim. The question of the origin, if you do believe in the cosmology of the Bible, that there was a flood in the Tower of Babel, the question is, what was the language that all humanity spoke before the Tower of Babel, and was it Hebrew? And like I was reading in the research, was it uniquely the Jewish people, Aber and yeah, so I don't know if Plasma, if you have, if I are you, do you follow me on Twitter? If I Twitter DM it to you, I guess I'll just put it in the chat. I'll just put the link in the chat. Hopefully it's not going to get too ugly here. If people want to come on and ask a few questions, but like I don't really want to turn the stream into just like a critique, people airing their grievances against Judaism. If you want to ask like questions in good faith, or try to understand the Jewish religion, but I don't want to have a venue just for people to air their grievances against the Jewish people. And I am trying to get to 1,000 subs, so I'll be able to stream from the Democratic Convention. Catherine Rapand had mentioned, were Adam and Eve Jews? No, I mean, definitely not. The Jews start with Jacob. Even Abraham wasn't a Jew. Abraham is referred to as a Hebrew. The term Jew is a loaded term because Jew signifies the land of Judah, which is a geographic signifier, and then the term Judah refers to more people than just the descendants of Jacob, and is a misnomer because Judah is the land of one of the tribes of Jacob, Yehuda, and was the term that the Greeks referred to the Jews by as the people of the land of Judah. But certainly Adam and Eve are the father and mother of all of humanity, not just for the Jewish people. Abraham is the father of multiple nations, including Ishmael and Muhammad. So Muhammad is a descendant of Abraham. Isaac has Esav, and I discussed on Ask the Rabbi number 7 the origins of Esav. Ecce's here in the chat. We discussed that at length. Esav, if he's the founder of the European royalty or the church, the king of the north. I guess Ecce has joined the call. I'm not sure if Plasma is going to join. So I mean, that's interesting in what I was talking about here. The genealogy is Abraham is referred to as a Hebrew, but he's not a Jew, so to say. He was a righteous person who was able to not suffer. According to the genealogy of biblicists, it's unclear whether Abraham was alive during the time of Babel, and it's possible because he had been righteous. He was not one of the people who suffered the curse of being separated into different nations, and he retained the original language of Hebrew that existed from Adam, and that's interesting. I'm going to go more in depth, and I'm actually going to look at some of the source material. But I guess we'll welcome Ecce and Plasma John Doe to the call. So what do you do to have anything directly related to the subject of Hebrew as the origin of all languages, or did you want to go straight into other areas of your interest?
It looks like Plasma wants to chime in. I would like to say, Doooovid, I went ahead and subscribed, so you're one sub closer. once
I
that
appreciate that. Yeah, I'd like
Okay.
to be able to live stream from the Democratic primaries. I drove past CNN has a big thing. There's going to be huge protests and the new rules. You can't do it unless you have 1,000 subscribers. And
Yeah.
Streamlabs makes the quality. I got 1080. Like my cell phone will give me 1080 HD quality, and I think Streamlabs limits the quality to 360. So if I don't have 1,000 subscribers, I'll probably record it and upload it rather than have the bad quality of Streamlabs. And I don't know what you do about that. I know you live stream, or if you just record it or use Streamlabs, you probably have the same issues.
My channel is ancient, and so I slipped in under the radar. I slipped in with the ability to stream without a 1,000 sub. Oh wait, no, we're talking about on the phone. I forgot about that. I'm just streaming on my PC.
Yeah, I don't know if you have an i8 Plus or something, but even if you don't have the i8 Plus, you probably get 720. And if you use Streamlabs, which lets you live stream, it reduces it to 360, which is pretty crappy quality, like resolution. So it'd probably be better to record it and upload it later than live stream, especially like I'm going to be doing street interviews with people. So with 1,000 subs, you get like HD clear vision of the people, and if I use Streamlabs, it'd be all choppy and blurry.
Yeah, I wanted to go ahead and because it looks like Plasma was unmuting, so I just want to pass it over.
Yeah, I think it's the first time you've ever been on my channel, Plasma. I know we've spoken on a few different channels before, and you even made some cuts about your beliefs in ghost, and I told you that it could just be compression software or light reflections, but I also do believe in spirits, so I appreciate some of your work. I know you have a pretty harsh take on Judaism, but and I don't know if either you or Ecce
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear
Can
you
you hear
now. I don't
Okay, great.
know if
Sorry.
either one of you have an interpretation of what the original language of all of humankind was, or if you did take like a narrative of the Tower of Babel, that if the question even interests you, what was the language that humanity spoke before the Tower of Babel?
Well, I can't go there because I'm not into books like that. I'm not into history. Whether it's very difficult for me to rely on history when I even think 9/11, that what we've been told is fake on that. So that's like 20 years ago. So I wouldn't be the guy to talk on that. Okay, go ahead.
But just to mention, Plasma, I spoke to Kevin Barrett, who is like the 9/11 truther, and that conversation, it's on his Patreon, but YouTube didn't let us upload it. And he tried to convince me like the 9/11, I don't call it conspiracies, but he lost his job. He was a professor who was preaching different theories in 9/11. He lost his job for that, and then he saw me on Adam Green and invited me, which he calls white jihad. He's a convert to Islam, but YouTube didn't even let him upload that video.
Well, I mean that's kind of pretty telling why they won't allow a different voice to come out. I mean, why would you not allow a different voice to appear? I mean, that's pretty damning of the people that are censoring, obviously, in my view. But you may have a different take on it.
Yeah, and I think even Doooovid is likely to face censorship. Like if I'm an anti-Zionist Jew, or I'm willing to platform people who have questions that they generally don't want platformed, it's possible. I haven't been censorship on my channel, although a lot of my discussions on other channels have been censored.
Exactly. Yeah. So why would the USA care about Doooovid's stand on Zionism? That's anyway, whatever. But you didn't. I don't know if you wanted to switch to a different topic, but if you wanted me to go through my questions I had earlier, but as far as like the beginning of origins of language, hey, it could be. I don't know. Hebrew could be, or Phoenician, or whatever it actually is.
Well, I haven't asked Doooovid anything. But I mean, if you're just kind of airing grievances against the Jewish people in general, or you have actual questions for me.
Yeah. You put on the stream, ask anything. So I was going to ask anything, and part and parcel of questions sometimes have an intent behind the question, or the question normally wouldn't be asked. But
yeah, just try to keep it within YouTube guidelines, because I'm trying to play within their rules so that I'll be able to. Okay, go
I
ahead.
believe I've always been respectful to you. Okay. Um, so the basic thing is, in Judaism, it's not the same type of morality as the Western world. I don't. You can stop me anytime you disagree with what I'm saying, because that might be helpful. But
Yeah, I don't think there's one unique morality of the Western world. Obviously, there's a lot of different morality systems of the West, but yeah, I mean, the Judaic, Hebrew, Middle Eastern morality system, like I would agree, it's different than the majority of Western morality systems. You like, as Luke Ford mentions, it's more of a dualistic morality system where there's a way of treating members of the same group versus out members, and the majority of Western systems are universal, although that's not universal among but yeah, I'm saying Luke Ford has covered that at length, and I generally agree with his research.
right. And so the way a white person translate that is that Jews can lie, and it's okay with to others. There's a different morality, but the whites generally, and again, these are all just generalities.
I
The
wouldn't put it
Western,
black and white like that. You're saying like having a dual morality system where you have rules for how you deal with your in group versus the out group
right?
doesn't mean like anything goes with the out group. Certainly,
No, I
the
didn't say
dual.
anything. I said that
Well, you said
the
lie. I mean that like no. I mean that Judaism clearly
it's a
does not.
lie. Yeah, it can be a lie.
There's circumstances where you are allowed to lie, but you're not just
That's what I
allowed to.
just said. That's what I just said. That's You can
But if
lie.
you're
That's what I
implying
said.
that you could just lie to the people of the out group, that's not accurate. There's only
Well, you just said
circumstances.
there's circumstances you can, so you just agreed that you can. So that's what I'm saying. I'm saying in the Western tradition, it's not acceptable to be a liar. In the Jewish tradition, it is, and the reason that I'll just try to make it clear. I really do have a hard time with Pilpul and Bilbo or whatever, but as much as we can keep it like in a Western type of logos or whatever, and appeal to logic instead of going to Pilpul and Bilbo, I would appreciate it. Like yes and no's are really good for me.
Well, it's part of the differentiation because the Pilpul method is going to be degrees. It's not truth or lying. There's varying degrees. So if it makes it
No, the
hard to
Bilbo is more
communicate,
the line. The Bilbo is more the line. What I was just trying to get to is
and
that
also just for historical accuracy, maybe Ecke has expertise on this. I mean, you're repeating Kant and Nietzsche's critique. You're not saying something new. Immanuel Kant had already given this point that you're making as a critique of the Jewish people, and Nietzsche and other Germanic philosophers hundreds of years ago had pointed out what you were saying, and even possibly earlier in Roman and Greek authors that critique the Jewish people had made the same critique that you're making.
yeah, no, it's been known a long time. It's just been suppressed lately in the West. But what I'm saying is, it was kind of comes down to a simple question: if Jews consider lying okay, and part of their tradition is the celebration of the lie, the deception, like Esther, being able to infiltrate and then to deceive and for the good of the Jew, the lying and the deception was done, and it's that act was considered like something really good, or kol nidre, whatever. So if this is the case between the Jewish mentality versus the Western, I'm just using broad terms. I'm not gonna get as smart and fancy as you talking Nietzsche, whatever. But if this happens to be true, then how can a white person trust a Jew? I mean, what would be the reason that if you know somebody is a liar, that you would trust a liar? That's the basic question. Why should anyone that knows somebody else is a liar trust a liar? Now, I believe you did kind of answer it. You said, well, go by the facts, go by the whatever, blah blah blah. But the simple point is, when you can't trust somebody, and at this point we're at even facts are being manipulated, and that's why I said about the history, etc., etc. It just if your race, let's say your race, we reversed it, you were the white and I was a Jew, and everything I said to you, you couldn't trust. I mean, how would you deal with it? Yeah, let's just say it like that. How would you deal with it if you were the race that was honest and tried to be truthful? And obviously, no, all whites are not that. I'm just saying the general part of the ethos, or whatever the important morality of your race was to be completely honest, transparent, to go out of your way to be clear, to even, if something is not 100% understood, you go out of your way to explain all the intricacies of a thing, whatever. But the other race that you're dealing with would go out of its way to be deceptive, to gain advantage. How would you, as a race, deal with that deceptive race? I'm very curious on that.
Were you asking multiple prong questions?
I'm sorry. Just that last question. If the roles were reversed, how would you deal with a deceptive race, and you were the honest race? That's a simple question right there. How would you deal with it? How would you want your race to deal with it?
Well, I think knowledge is power. So it could be just the knowledge of the ethnic differences and how different ethnic groups go about it. Could be enough that you would be able to successfully deal with the group, knowing that they have a different outlook towards language or truth or group benefit. Without going to the framing conception to defend the Jewish people and saying the sense that no, I mean Jews don't. Jews will also uphold the value of truth and honesty. We just have a conflicting, possibly understanding where there's other values that could trump the truth. So in terms of possibly group ethnic benefit, that the truth could be bent, but certainly that Judaism, the scripture, the Jewish people in general promote honesty. They promote honesty to Gentiles also. It's just that there's other conflicting values, like you mentioned, Esther, where it could be group benefit would be more valuable than the truth. But it doesn't mean that, God forbid, everything is a lie, because truth is certainly a valuable concept among Jews also. Are you rejecting, you're saying that Jews just promote dishonesty, or are you saying that we don't view truth as an absolute value, and if it comes to ethnic nepotism or something like that, it's possible that we would be in a situation where we would look at this value of in-group preference and benefit that would make it okay to not be truthful, as opposed to your conception of the West, where truth is an absolute value and you can't go against the truth to bend that kind. And then if you're putting that in a framing to say, like, you're claiming that Jews are just perpetually dishonest about anything, versus a more nuanced understanding that Jews are generally pretty honest, but if it comes to their own ethnic nepotistic benefit, that they may be less dishonest in the sense from a negotiation or dealing with different people, just understanding that different groups have different philosophical systems, that you would be able to successfully deal with Jews, just knowing that they have a different worldview and a different outlook. And so if an Aryan or Westerner says something, you could take it as word value, as where possibly if a different ethnic group, possibly including Jews, says something, you have to say that it's likely that the Jew is telling the truth. But at the same time, if there's a conflicting value with their group benefit, maybe they aren't telling the truth.
Okay, I apologize. I'm going to do this a different way, if that's okay with you. I don't know how much time you want to allot for me or whatever, but there's race A and there's race B. Okay, race A is honest. Race B is dishonest. You are race A. You're the honest race. How do you deal with race B? If race B is in control of information, is in control and has the power economically, they own the money supply, they own they're in the government, they're affecting the media, they will lie to you. You try to ask them a direct question and they will lie to you. This is just race A, race B. It doesn't, let's forget all this other things. It doesn't matter. This is on a different planet. How
theoretically,
let me finish, brother. If you are race A, it's on a different planet. It's not even us, so don't worry about it. If you're race A and race B is in control of the media, the money, they lie to you, they deceive you, and they're actually trying to harm you, what would be your way to deal with race B? This is a different planet. Don't worry. This is Minecraft. Different planet. How would you, as race A, deal with those that are trying to harm you and will lie and are in control? How would you deal with that as a race? Simple
Be
as
the
that.
current measure of rating systems, of transparency, and of law and
No,
order.
there is no transparency because race B controls the information. They deceive you. They control the information. They lie. You cannot get clear information because you're being deceived. So how do you deal with that as race A?
Carefully, to the best of your
Exactly.
ability.
Okay, say again. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
I mean, carefully to the best of your ability. I'm saying, or if you're going to look, is it, if it's such a situation where you have to rebel, or you just have to accept dying a martyr, or whatever the exact other extenuating circumstances, that if you put it, you can't have transparency, you can't have law and order because the cheating group is in power, and there's no way to usurp the power from them, and then they're just going to be able to cheat and get away with it. I wouldn't want to be in that situation. It'd be pretty negative if your only choices is to have a rebellion that may or may not succeed, or martyrdom. I might choose martyrdom if that was the case, where like society's rigged against you, and there's nothing you could do about it besides to be cheated and basically enslaved by a cheating system. Basically martyrdom is probably your only option.
Well, you gave two options. You said one to rebel and one to martyr.
Well, I mean, rebellion is, if that was the scenario, what you're saying, rebellion is basically going to be martyrdom. So if one group controls all the power and all the information, rebellion is basically guaranteed martyrdom.
Well, I mean, that's actually a good way to put it. At a certain point, when the information is so controlled that well, anyway, okay, fair enough. But I guess that was the main gist of what I was trying to say with the Kol Nidre and the Esther and all this stuff. I mean, the basic fact is that as a member of race A, it's just a very difficult spot. Like I say, I don't blame anyone for being in their genes or whatever. You're born that way. I'm born this way, and this is just the realm we're in right now. So, yeah, okay. You effectively were very honest, and I appreciate it.
That's all you got?
I think so. Yeah, you did it. You did good. At least you were. I think that was the best way to approach it. Is just take it away from the the naming of any particular race and just make it the actual situation that it is.
Jews are going to Jew, and it's like E. Michael Jones was saying, do you haggle and negotiate or do you not? And okay, maybe you could say, let's say I admitted to you that I would use ethnic nepotism, and that would outweigh my value of honesty, even though I'm going to propose that I value truth and honesty, as where you might say that's an absolute value, and that there shouldn't be other things that will trump that. In my system, that truth and honesty are valuable, but there are other values that could include group advancement that will trump that. In modern society, you have levels of transparency and law and order. So, for example, I run an eBay business. I have 100% seller rating. So you could say, okay, maybe because, like, God forbid, like I need to, make as much money so I could give it to Israel, so we could expand our territory and win the war. That if I could get away with making more money off of my eBay sales, so that I could help Israel, I would. However, because there's a rating system, and if you buy from me, you could give me a ranking based on how honest I dealt with you. And in general, the U.S. doctors, dentists, accountants all have these public rating systems, and you do have reasonable levels of transparency in the West, where documents, contracts, where saying me and you could enter into a business, and there'd be a contract, and it would be filed with the court, and that would be publicly available, so that you could deal with a person knowing their tendency, whatever it is. And I mean, without even going into the the questions going back to like Moses Mendelssohn and Immanuel Kant, because they were contemporaries. In fact, Moses Mendelssohn defeated Immanuel Kant in an essay writing.
See, here's the deal, Doooovid, and I don't mean to be rude. It's like everything you're saying is just like blah blah blah. It doesn't. It has really nothing to do with what I was talking about. But
Well, if you're
and I
making
apologize for
the
that.
assumption that you're saying, if you're hypothesizing, saying like, well, what if I tried? Actually, I think the Jews are the honest group and the West is the dishonest group, and I'm going to carry that argument versus it's just your ethnic nepotism.
No, I mean, we already went with race A, race B. I think that's the simplest way to do it for me. I think it's the most honest, the way that you can be the most honest, and that I can get the most honest answer. I think you were shiningly honest, and that's, I don't know if I've made this clear to you before, but I don't hate the liars. I don't hate Satan. I don't hate anyone. I don't hate any being. Every being is just doing what it thinks is correct. I just don't support the deceivers and the liars and Satan, blah blah blah.
Well, actually, that's when you propose a racial rating system and saying in the West we're individualistic, and so you can.
No. Hey, wait. Before you go, I mean, I don't. The last question I will ask you is, how much Jew blood do you think makes you like you are a deceiver? In the eyes of stop. That was stupid the way to say it. I am race A and you are race B. How much of that blood makes race B have its traits?
I believe in free will. I mean, even if I were to accept that there was a genetic predisposition to act in a certain way, I believe in free will. So I reject the fundamental tendency. So even if you could study and demonstrate that race A has a predisposition to act in a certain way and race B has a genetic predisposition to act in another way, on an individual level, all of those people have free will, and people from race A, even if their race has a tendency to be more honest, could be dishonest, and people from race B, even if their race has a tendency to be dishonest, through free will could be honest. And that's why an individual.
Yeah,
so
well, I guess we are talking
Doooovid's
group
a half
traits.
Jew. That
I think we're talking group traits. I think that's a more realistic thing to say. I think a narcissistic person with narcissistic disorder in race A could become a welcome member of race B. I mean, that's because they lack sympathy. They're narcissists, and obviously they still have the capability of cognitive empathy. So they're sociopaths. They don't have to be psychopaths. Psychopathy is genetic, and that's what I believe. Obviously, race B is. I think
what
it's
about
genetic. Well, obviously, it's part of it. It's part of it. But if you are genetically predisposed, I'm not even gonna say the word. If you are genetically predisposed to that, you are going to more easily use that. Yeah, of course, there's free will, whatever, but it doesn't help a white man on the beach in the sun, because if he doesn't have black skin, he's still going to burn like hell. There's just certain things that are more difficult to ignore. Certain traits are more difficult to ignore. I'm just saying that I would just kind of a question of how much the one drop rule of blood, 2%, 10%, 20%, you're 50%. So I'm just curious if you had a idea on how much Jew makes a person a Jew. You said Jews within a Jew, so that's kind of like to me almost like a genetic statement.
Well, it's a predisposition, but I mean, my belief system would have free will that would factor into it. So even though you have,
no, of course, on an individual level, but on a group level, no. I'm just saying that the general trait, the general flow of history, I'm not talking about a tree. I'm talking about the forest. I'm talking about the general way that things go. So anyway, Doooovid, you did excellent. I really appreciate it. I'm not saying you did excellent like you could do better or whatever. I'm just saying I appreciate that you are. I appreciate this dialogue. That's all.
Okay, if you're going to sign off, I got I mean, you have those sound issues, so hopefully you get better quality technology. I got a 1080 high definition camera now, so if you see any spirits in the background with my new HD camera, let me know.
Wait. I'm sorry. Are you conceding that they are? I thought you were saying it was dust and stuff. I always find it hard to figure out where people are at with my stuff.
Well, I'm a skeptic, but I believe it's possible. And to say, okay, is it dust? Is it compression error? Was it light in a random direction, or was it a spirit? And I do believe in spirits, but I'm also have a scientific mind and would need more evidence than just than you saw something in the stream. But as I said, now I have an HD camera, so hopefully the reception is better. So if there that it'd be less likely to have been one of the other.
I appreciate that. Are you still hearing voices? And because sometimes I am seeing you look up, kind of like, I even see you shake your head sometimes a little or whatever. That's kind of a sign of connection to energies. But I'm just curious. Are you? Is it intensifying, or is it the same? Are you not doing it anymore, or?
I've been very tired recently. I've also I've been having a lot of dreams. But yeah, I'm resigned to energies and forces, and I try to measure myself by what I would consider spiritual forces. Although I'm also trying to be scientific at the same time and recognize that they could just be psychological or biological cues from other reasons.
Right, but you're not hearing the voices then.
Well, I'm not really a hearing voices kind of guy. That I mean, like in that sense. Okay. I mean, I know that conversation we had in OV, saying, okay, the voice of the conscious inside of my head, I wouldn't classify like hearing voices and saying like my internal dialogue. I don't think that's the same thing as like
okay, that's fair enough.
Voices. I mean, I do have an internal mental dialogue, if that's what you mean.
No, when we spoke one time, I thought you were actually saying you actually heard voices. That's the way I recalled it. But like I say, I definitely can see energy around you. I definitely would say you have illumination. I define it much differently than most people do. It's not like positive or negative or whatever. It's just a type of energy when somebody is more in tune with their energy and letting it expand beyond. I can literally see it. I can literally identify people more easily now that are illuminated. So, again,
let me know if you see me on any channels or have any theories. Like I do check your channel occasionally. I find that interesting, and feel free to share that with me.
I appreciate talking with you, Doooovid.
Okay, take care.
Blessings on your path, and I've said this to other Jews and other people. When this 3D is done, I look forward to talking with you, and we both can figure out the real truth and what is right and wrong. And I, like I say, because of your honesty, to me, in a way, I don't know if you've done anything wrong. You're simply playing your part of your genetic role. I would say that in a way, yeah. But anyway, whatever. I just wish you love on your path, but obviously, you know what the battlefield is. So this is a 3D, but this is just a moment in time, the ever present now, and it's already been written. Whatever happens, happens. So much love, brother.
Okay, you two take care. Of it.
Thank you.
Okay, I put the link in the chat again. I'm not sure if Ecce, you had something to ask me, or you just popped on the stream since the link was there.
Little of column A, little of column B. The Amalekite question, actually. So my question was, well, it actually spawned from a question, which was, how would an Amalekite child know that they were an Amalekite? And I guess that's one thing that is worth asking in itself. How would an Amalekite child self-recognize as an Amalekite?
Well, in these days, it would be unlikely. The lineages have been lost, so it's more an esoteric understanding at the end of days. in the assumption, if there is going to be, God forbid, a battle, an ultimate Armageddon, the forces between, kind of like Plasma was talking about, genetic predispositions or even genetic determinism, that the people on the losing side or the evil side of the battle will be on that side because of a genetic determinism based on tribal identity, which also could be like suffering for the sins of their parents. They have a genetic predeterministic nature because of the sins of their ancestors. But according to almost all the rabbis, all the understanding, those lineages have been lost. In the Bible, those lineages were clear. So up until from Amalek coming in the time of Moses till 800 years, there were known tribes of Amalek. They lived in certain areas of Israel. The lineage was quite clear. And then after Sennacherib and the Persian conquest of Israel, it no longer became clear who Amalek was. The Bible mentioned like Haman, who obviously migrated because Amalek was in Israel, then migrates. That Haman somehow becomes the viceroy of Ahasuerus in the book of Esther, and said that he was like that, and that it had that deep disposition because of his genetic factor of being an Amalekite. Till today, if you look like, okay, God forbid, was Hitler an Amalekite, or even in Israel, they throw the word down, basically like a person's our enemy, they're an Amalekite, which is more like a war call than a true genetic understanding. Because I say that I don't think anyone thinks that there's a known tribal origin of people in that sense.
So if a person is okay, so I'm just trying to understand as best I can. My faint grasp is that Judaism is attempting to protect itself from something, and that something, so far as I can tell,
Well, I put in the biblical narrative, there was a tribe of Amalek that comes from one specific person that has problem with the patriarchs in biblical story, and then his descendants become tribes, and they, over generations, there's wars basically every generation between these warring tribes, and it was very well known that the tribe of Amalek lived in this very specific area, and basically there was war over and over again. And comes the idea you have to completely wipe these people out because there's a genetic disposition that these people are always going to be warring against us. So the only way to prevent the war will be the complete eradication, God forbid you want to use the term genocide, of that people. But in the biblical narrative where you have the language of Amalekite, it's assumed that there's a certain area in the greater Israel area where these tribes live, and it was very well known. Maybe they had their own language or own customs, that this was these people. And then at a certain point, possibly with the Persian or Babylonian conquest, where there was no longer a given, city or tribe or center where all these people lived, and it became more a spiritual concept than the biblical narrative, where it was a known exact city and town where these people lived.
Okay, so I'm just trying to get a grasp. There is a thing that Jews are attempting to protect themselves from, and that thing from which they need protection is either Edom or the Amalekites, or maybe a combination. I'm not sure.
Well, Edom, like we discussed on Ask the Rabbi number 7, refers to Jacob's brother Esau.
Yes.
And that was, Ash all day read the blessing, was kind of like, well, sometimes we work out in a good situation, and sometimes it's a bad situation, as opposed to Amalek, which came from, Amalek is actually also descended from Esau. So Amalek is an Edomite tribe, but it's just one specific branch of Edom. And so this specific tribe of Edom, which I said was in the biblical narrative, was a known thing. Like there was thousands of them, and they lived in a certain area, and it was known that these were the descendants of Amalek, the Amalekites. And after a certain period, it just like Edom, where in biblical Israel, it was known that these were the descendants of Esau, and they lived in certain areas and ran certain businesses.
Mention that.
and then it becomes this spiritual concept. Like I said, well, is the Queen of England Edom? Is Hitler a Moloch? Where you don't have a genetic family tree like in biblical times, it would have been very clearly known, the genealogy of these tribes. So it's more like a mystical concept to say, why are these conflicts happening today? Like Plasma was saying, it's a genetic determinism factor.
So you just said both that it was mystical and genetic.
I said in ancient times it was genetic because it was well known that these tribes lived in certain areas, and it was basically known to everybody that was the origins of those tribes. And then after the vast expansion of the Persian and Babylonian empires and taking over Israel, those tribes were dispersed, and it's not known anymore who the exact where they went, if they had been eradicated in that time or if they survived. But the exact genealogies from 2,500 years ago have been lost.
So it sounds like anyone could be an Amalekite.
Yeah, so in today's parlance, like an enemy of the Jewish people could get hit with the term Edomite or Amalekite. And so if it's an Edomite, it means, okay, you got to be careful, but conceivably it could be worked out in a way that we could get along with them and have a mutually beneficial relationship, as opposed to a Amalekite. It's just a determinative factor. This person's, God forbid, an enemy of the Jewish people, and they will be till they die. Although Maimonides had an opinion that it was different from the majority of the sages, that it's possible for even an Amalekite to repent. Although it would appear the majority of the Hebrew sages thought that it was impossible, that an Amalekite, it was beyond their free will to repent.
Okay, so you're saying that the majority of sages say that it's impossible for an Amalekite to repent, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so according to this line of reasoning, is it possible for an Amalekite child to repent?
Only according to Maimonides. According to the majority of the sages, no. And that's the story in the Bible. I mean, God forbid, where I think it was King Shaul, but he spared the children or the animal or the trees. Even like the trees in the town and the animals, he was supposed to slaughter, and he took mercy upon them, and then was punished for that. So unfortunately, according to the explicit writings of the Bible, it was pretty harsh.
Okay, so according to the sages, it is not possible for an Amalekite child to repent.
Except for one lone sage.
Okay, and at the same time, if it's impossible for an Amalekite child to repent, and we don't know who the Amalekites are, and the Amalekites are basically anyone that is deemed ungood, I just can't help but wonder about good old Deuteronomy 7 style thinking, which is that once you have identified a person as an Amalekite, I mean, there's nothing to stop someone from just going Deuteronomy 7 on the entire family.
Well, God forbid, I say the Amalekite is put to be as the lone irrational actor. That the Amalekite, according to the biblical understanding, wants to destroy the Jewish people, even at the expense of their own demise. And the example that the sages use is like jumping into boiling water in order just to cool it off a little bit. That the Amalekites desired to destroy the Jewish people, that they would martyr themselves, just whatever sense that example makes of jumping into boiling water in order to cool the temperature a tiny bit. But that they're considered a non-rational actor, as opposed to the 7 tribes or the other tribes in Israel, or the Edomites and others are considered rational actors.
If you don't mind my asking, how does one identify an Amalekite? How did you identify an Amalekite?
Well, you can't. So, I mean, in contemporary Israel, God forbid, they'll throw the term around, but or even today, like in Jewish parlance, they might throw the term around as just to signify, okay, this person, God forbid, is an enemy of Israel. Are they an enemy of Israel because they're an Edomite? and then conceivably they could be reasoned with and become an ally? Or are they an enemy of Israel because they're an Amalekite, which means that they will continue to be an enemy of Israel until they're destroyed? So from unanimous consensus, we do not know the lineages of people. There's no knowledge, no rabbi claims to know the knowledge of the current location of the descendants of Amalek.
So
even what I mentioned, like the Queen of England, or possibly like the church and the different supplications that the sages had that the current location of Edom in royal houses in across Europe, or aristocracies across Europe as being the descendants of Edom. There's no record to give the current location of the descendants of Amalek.
do the Amalekites still exist?
I mean, it's an esoteric question. So in theory, yes, they still exist, but we don't know. And God forbid, at the final war, from an esoteric level, it will turn out that the enemies of Israel happen to be the long lost descendants of Amalek, but we don't know. You can't. There's no way to determine, oh, this child is a descendant of Amalek and destined to become the enemy of Israel.
Okay, so then from whom? Okay, fair enough. So
But it
they,
doesn't mean you're not going to hear like extremist Israelis or Jews or rabbis that will throw the term around as a way to saying basically we have to destroy this enemy. The only even God forbid from a point of extreme violence or God forbid genocide as just a common parlance of saying like they're going to keep on trying to destroy us till we destroy them, and therefore they have to go Amalekite on them. Oh, but that doesn't mean that there's any recognized sage that believes that they actually know the current descendants of Amalek.
okay. Now you were saying something about how in order to not be regarded as an enemy, there must be an offer to repent, and the person must accept the offer and decide to repent. Am I correct in that? Am I misunderstanding?
Maimonides is like the lone sage that says even an Amalekite can repent, which is difficult because the biblical verse with King Saul, who is punished for not like burning down the trees and killing the livestock, it pretty much implies that. But the language in the Bible is you should erase the memory of Amalek, and so Maimonides takes this approach to say that if the memory is possible, that they could repent because it's just the memory. So it's a biblical anomaly of free will where it's assume that everybody has free will except for these Amalekites that are somehow dispositioned because they were born out of incestuous sinful relationships that God forbid all of their descendants till Armageddon will be bound to just irrationally do everything they can to destroy the Jewish people.
Okay, so if a child is offered to repent and they do not repent, then would it be permissible to destroy them, assuming they were an Amalekite?
Yeah, I mean, God forbid. I mean, the book of Joshua has genocide.
Okay,
I mean, it's in your Bible. You have the 5 books of Moses, and then Moses dies before the Israelites enter Israel, and then Joshua leads the people of Israel until King David establishes the monarchy. And there's clear stories of God forbid, which in modern parlance would be genocide, and the biblical narrative of the prophets will justify these battles or wars, and sometimes even the case of the genociding of children or trees and livestock based on these biblical narratives about the sins of the parents or different prophetic understandings. And the Bible's a book of war, records these things. And if you're asking for the modern day interpretation of that, but no one could deny what the Bible says. It's very clearly, in multiple books of the prophets, these stories of genocide.
okay, so All right, I feel like I've gotten that answer pretty well locked down, and in the modern interpretation, now, I mean, are you? Let me just ask then, what is the modern interpretation?
Well, the modern interpretation is just at the end of the days, it will be seen that the ultimate enemies that need to be destroyed are like that because they're the descendants of Amalek. That's a predisp. You like that. Um, a person doesn't rationally decide they dislike the Jewish people or Israel based on logic and then turn against us and wage war. That'll be these predisposed descendants of Amalek that will arise to lead the battle against Israel, and that's kind of a narrative of eschatology of what's going to happen at the end of days. So, on a practical day-to-day level, it has absolutely no bearing. Even if a Jewish person has trouble with a non-Jew, there's no basis to say, oh, it's probably because he's an Amalekite. Although you might have a Jewish tendency to say, okay, like, oh, I'm having a hard time getting along with this Ecce guy. It can't be because he legitimately has good questions. It must be you're an Amalekite. So you might find that kind of parlance among common talking among Jews, but that doesn't mean that that's a proper biblical understanding of the end of days theology. And end of days theology generally isn't how someone should conduct their daily life. So in Israel, it's much more common because you have God forbid, Israel's in a constant state of war, and you have like the Palestinians, and God forbid, it's not like the Palestinians are upset that they had their land were driven off their land, and or their cousins have been killed, or whatever the situation, and that's why they're at war for Israel. That you'll have common Israeli attitude will be they're doing this because they're a Moloch, and it's somewhat a justification for extreme actions, saying, let's drive them out of Israel, even if it, God forbid, means extreme violence or, even genociding children or something because they're a Moloch and God said we could.
So it sounds like there's actually not that much of a difference between the older version and the newer version. The modern interpretation doesn't seem all that different. It's just that the genetic component has been erased.
I would argue that the modern interpretation is incorrect, although you will have many rabbis in Israel that would disagree with me and will use the term Amalek and will use that to justify military force in Israel. And possibly in America or something outside of Israel, if you're talking, God forbid, about like targeted assassinations from a theological perspective, and saying like, okay, we have no choice than to, God forbid, carry out this assassination because the person is a Moloch, and if you don't, they're just going to keep on trying to destroy us, and it's sanctioned by God. So my understanding of Judaism, that's a false theology. But it doesn't mean that there aren't rabbis that disagree with me. And in Israel, there's certainly a substantial amount of rabbis that disagree with my understanding here.
All right. I feel like you've answered my questions in the sense that they are, yeah.
I'm just answering to the best of my ability. Like, I'm not a Israeli IDF rabbi. I don't command troops. I have followers on YouTube. I don't have any followers that are, going to do what I say in that sense. I could explain the various opinions of the sages or try to make sense of if you are a believing Jew and you do believe in the prophets and the sages, or if you're interested from a non-Jewish perspective of what the Jewish religion believes in, and then you obviously have your pilpul where just because Doooovid says this is what Judaism stands for doesn't mean that there's not a whole bunch of Jews that completely disagree with me.
Actually, there's a question in the chat that I kind of find amusing. What constitutes harm? Would naming be harm?
Well, naming a Moloch is somewhat like, God forbid, a death sentence. So it could be code where like they say, oh, this person's a Moloch. So just naming that is a way of saying that you're saying, like, God forbid, that person deserves the death penalty.
So naming is harm in itself.
Well, as a code, he was saying naming in the sense of saying the words, God forbid, saying this person deserves to die, God forbid, is
No, I'm not saying. I'm not
is
saying.
so when you say that someone is a Moloch,
Yeah,
that could be interpreted as saying that the person, God forbid, deserves to die.
yeah, in no way am I advocating anything. I'm not suggesting anything. It's not. I want to be very clear. I've never said anything of the sort, and I stand by that. And I want to go ahead and just throw the brakes on that bad boy. So what you're telling me is that by naming a thing as what it is, that could constitute harm. Yes?
Within a system that holds that there is such a thing that, based on its essence, deserves to die. So if you're looking in the possible interpretation of the Judeo system, that there is such a thing that just based off of its pure identity, it deserves death. So naming a certain thing that could be interpreted as a way to, God forbid, a call to violence just based on the name. And if your system doesn't have such a thing where there is such an entity that deserves to be destroyed based just on its pure existence, that may not apply. But in the Judeo system, where there might be such an entity, so to just name something that entity could be considered violence.
Okay, so what if, going back to race A, race B from a different planet that doesn't exist, what if, because race A, we're going to say you're race A, the good, pious, truthful race, and we're not talking about race B, okay? What if you, Doovid, a member of the good, pious race A, were told that you may not name race B? And what if race B held, and remembering that race B, they are liars, what if race B claimed that by being named that it was violence? However, within your race A, the good, pious, truthful race, Doovid, your race, what if race A held that there was actually no compulsion at all to violence in the act of naming itself? It was simply knowing that a member of race B was in fact a member of race B. Would that be violence?
If you want to really pull it out, what happens when two different people refer to the same terminology in a different way? So according to the way I understand meaning, when I refer to that, it's nothing. It doesn't mean anything. It's just a appellation that's describing something. But according to, say race B, that appellation has more than just a descriptive term. It has a possible imperative to action. So you're saying, well, when you name it according to the way you define words, it should be fine. But the fact that other people understand those same words to mean something different, they're going to bend on not allowing you to use those same words.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that race A, the good, truthful, pious race, the race that you belong to, David, in having a different value set relative to race B, the evil liars, there are going to be issues with simply identifying members of race B because race B has forbidden itself from being identified.
Yeah, if you want to use the example of a Moloch, let's say, according to the Israelites, just identifying a Moloch could put the Amalekite in danger of extreme violence. But to another person, like Amalekites, they may be fine people. They don't have the same negative judgment upon them. So when you identify this person as an Amalekite, even though you don't intend anything bad by it, but just by identifying them, then someone else who has a blood libel against that person might use that fact that you identified them in a negative way.
Okay, so essentially what you're saying is that the act of naming an Amalekite, naming them, naming the Amalekites, depending on the value system we're talking about, may or may not be harm.
Yeah, you may not mind the Amalekites. You could be, okay, this is my friend the Amalekite. I don't have any problem with them. You could call him my friend the Amalekite. But when you call them my friend the Amalekite, maybe there's going to be an Israelite that, what do you mean? You have a friend an Amalekite. Like it's my, God forbid, my God-bound duty to destroy this person. So even though you meant no harm when you identified them as an Amalekite, that you put them in harm's way by naming them.
So you could actually unintentionally harm someone by naming them without realizing at all that you were harming them.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, you might have your friend the Amalekite and have absolutely no knowledge of the blood feud between the Israelites and the Amalekites. So when you named your friend the Amalekite without knowledge of the blood feud that existed between them and the Israelites, that you didn't even realize you were putting them in harm's way.
That makes it sound like maybe having a population where there are lots of Amalekites and Jews in close proximity might be a real hazard, might be a real problem.
Well, that's why I said, according to most or almost all Hebrew historians, you don't actually know the Amalekite lineage has been lost. So if someone self-identified as an Amalekite and said, okay, the Jews don't know who the Amalekites are, but this person's like, well, like, I know I'm an Amalekite. The Jews don't know I'm an Amalekite, but I know I'm an Amalekite. And they tell you, like, Ecce, hey, like, I'm an Amalekite, and, please don't tell the Jews because we have a long-going blood feud. Or they might not even know it. They could just be like a lost Amalekite, where somehow their ancestors' tradition told them, that they're still an Amalekite, but they've lost. However, hypothetically, you want to say that, but I mean, if you interpret that to modern parlance in America with censorship, and where you might appear to just be, saying something that's completely harmless to the other person, they could interpret that as harmful due to regional geopolitics, and that doesn't necessarily just have to apply to Jews or Israelites. That could apply to anybody who has a historical blood feud with other tribes around the world, and knowing that they belong to a certain tribe might put them in harm of blood feuds, geopolitical blood feuds that you didn't intend to do just by naming them, identifying them with a certain tribe.
Check. I feel like I've sort of half hogged the mic, so I'm gonna go ahead and mute myself. It looks like Goose is on. Hey, Goose.
You guys know each other? Goose appeared on my show a few weeks ago after a chess stream, and I think he's in your area in Northern California. The Goose Bear,
actually, just down the street from me. I live on Pico. He lives on Robertson. It's a great Jewish neighborhood. We actually go to the same moil. So
okay. Well, have you seen his goose collection, his duck collection? He has a YouTube channel, and he does breed goose. That's why he's Goose Bear, because that's what he does, and he's got a channel showing it.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to hear from Goose, though. Okay.
I was listening to you guys while reading about Esau and trying to figure some of this out. I'm not as good as I should be on my Old Testament narrative, my Torah narrative. But no, I was just curious about, kind of wanted to have a comfy chat about, this is about linguistics initially, correct?
Yeah, I actually have a lot more information to show on different word origins. I mean, the question of, if you have a Christian background, I know you said your ancestors were Christian preachers. A lot of the Christians also believe that Hebrew was the original language. If you were a biblical fundamentalist who believed in, the basic Genesis narrative of creation and the flood and the Tower of Babel, the question is, what language did people speak before the dispersion of the Tower of Babel, and was it Hebrew? And does Hebrew as a language itself have some sort of mystical power? And I don't know if you're connected to your Christian ancestors to know what they believed on that issue.
Yeah, I don't know if they necessarily have a particular view about that. I think they would probably generally assume that to be the case. As I understand it, the Semitic branch of the Afro-Asiatic language family has a much deeper, what do they call it, time depth with language families. They have different time depths. And its time depth is considered by linguists to be quite a bit deeper than, let's say, Indo-European. And Indo-European is fairly old, but it's, 6,000 years, 7,000 years. But Semitic is very old, and it's only a branch of a larger tree. It's a really interesting subject to me because when you look at ethno-linguistic maps of the world, you just have to wonder how in the hell did it get like that? Because you look at places like Indo-European it's not too complex to kind of piece together the history of that, even if we don't know what happened there at its genesis. But you look at places like Southeast Asia or Borneo or something, and it just doesn't make any damn sense. And even East Asia, you see like Tungusic languages, which I think may be related to Mongolian, I'm not sure, but then you have Sino-Tibetan, which is like Chinese, Tibetan, Burmese, and then you have Koreanic languages, and then you have Japonic languages, and they're not related. And I can't, for the life of me, figure out how they got in their places and why they're not related. And I'm assuming the Tower of Babel story has a lot to do with it. I just haven't been able to make sense of it. So I was curious what you thought about all that.
Yeah, I'm a multiple conflicting ideas in my head at the same time kind of guy. That's basic Doovidism. So if you're looking like ethnic, we were talking about ethnic predispositions in terms of probably the most basic ethnic predisposition is the ethnic predisposition towards language. And okay, we're all speaking the English language, and maybe none of us are actually Anglos. But in English, people speak a slightly different form of English than the conglomerate of even white Americans that American English. And also like the origin, like the biblical narrative that we all spoke the same language and all come from the same common ancestor. Within the schools of evolution, the understanding is different now. There's understandings that man arose in different places, and there isn't necessarily one single like mother of all humanity. And also with languages where there had been an understanding that possibly like Indo-European, like a Sanskrit precursor may have been the origin of all languages, to now different theories where there's just too many different languages that have too much different variants that it seems unlikely that there was one original language that all others derived from. And later in the stream, I'll actually look at some of the evidence that like Hebrew, and you look at a whole bunch of words where I'll take like a Hebrew root word and show tens of different languages where their root word for that similar meaning is very similar to the Hebrew. And but at the same time, you can't do that with all languages, and there's contradictions. And it's related to a lot of the racial ethnic questions that are discussed on some of these streams, like what are the origins of your ancestors? Does everyone have the same common origin? And what's the connection between race, ethnicity, and language? Can as modern scholars, anybody could basically just speak a different language, that if you were brought up in China and raised by the Chinese, you would speak perfect Chinese and you would be able to make the sounds. Possibly you would have an accent, even if you were born and raised in China. You might have a different accent just based on your genetics than the native Chinese.
It's funny you say that, because people wonder why Jared Taylor has the cadence that he does until you hear him do an interview in Japanese, and then you completely understand why he sounds the way he does. That's because he grew up partially in Japan. Yeah,
I was looking like I forget, different Greek scholars and their ancient scientific experiments that thought that, genetically you would just, now that it's that you learn language, there's language acquisition, and like Chomsky's universal grammar, where you have kind of just a generic universal understanding of language that will allow any person to learn any language. Historically, that wasn't the way that people understood it, and even till today, it could be disputed. And so if you're just looking for historical explanations, if you're rejecting the current science where basically anyone could speak any language and there's basically no genetic determination that makes one person more likely to be a better speaker of one language than the next, then it's just a geographic pattern of history, why languages arose in different areas. And it also probably directly ties into like what makes a nation, what makes a culture, where your modern scientist would say that culture is not genetic, that all these things are largely environmentally learned. But then you also have the testing of clearly racial, ethnic determination factors of all different type things like intelligence or even behavior.
I think it depends on how you define culture, because I think we have a tendency in America now to think of culture as just ideas, but there's also
like Plasma was talking about like honesty, where he believes that like Westerners have a genetic disposition to be straightforward and honest, as opposed to Middle Easterners or possibly Jews or whoever you want to say have a disposition to be less straightforward and honest. And it's not culture, it's genetic. Versus so almost all modern university scholars would reject even Plasma's question as fundamentally misunderstanding.
What was Plasma's question?
But he was assuming if there's like a race A that's always honest and a race B that's always dishonest, or something like that, or even like Kant and Nietzsche, that you presume that the Aryan European man had a more nature to be straightforward and honest and call it like it is, as opposed to the Middle Eastern that personality that might look at the truth as more fluid.
I tend to think that there may be genetics contributing to temperamental features that lend themselves to one thing or another, depending on the environments we're subject to in the past. Like maybe being subject to ice ages in the north. I think I'm mostly Germano-Celtic, and that that sounds about right. I don't think it's purely cultural.
Because if you were raised in the Middle East from a child and were part of like bargaining, fluid truth culture, that your genetics wouldn't matter. You would come to act in a way like the Middle Easterners would, and there wouldn't be a genetic disposition for you to be more straightforward and honest.
And I can't know that because I haven't been in that situation. It kind of makes sense to me that, I tend to take the idea of evolution seriously enough to where I think, well, given enough time and environmental pressures, if it's possible for there to be genetic influencers of a certain kind of behavior, they will develop. I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine how genes relate directly to complex human behavior, and that's why, like, even Kevin McDonald's ideas, I haven't read his book, so I'm not going to give a concrete opinion on that. But I know that Steven Pinker, and granted he is Jewish, but he discounted the thesis just on its face because he figured it to contradict behavioral genetics at its core. I don't know enough about it to really be able to give an opinion, but it is difficult to, like, for example, you can't say that there's a bike stealing gene that black people possess, but maybe there are genes that contribute to temperamental features that make petty crime more likely given certain conditions.
Yeah, and God forbid, I don't want to be careful with anything even close to hate speech on my channel, but you could possibly relate that to long-term ability for long-term planning and thinking versus short-term planning and thinking, that people who are like a cold winter theory, where people who were in colder climates had to think in terms of longer periods of time, which might have needed them to have a more honesty level because they had to, their livelihood depended on the trust of people in order that they would be able to survive the winter, as opposed to warmer climates where people did not need such long-term thinking. And that could apply to things like criminal propensities. But someone like Pinker would, saying on a genetic level, there's no known knowledge for genetic selection to work on a group level. It only works on an individual level. Although, like I mentioned on Church of Entropy, the paradox of like hive type cultures where not everybody reproduces, but the concept of doing something for your nation, there is no genetic understanding of why benefiting your group why someone would act in benefit of their group as opposed to just benefit of themselves.
Even Brett Weinstein tried to make this argument to Joe Rogan that there was a group genetic benefit to Catholic priests and what they did, even though religion's it's just a scheme. It's just to control people. And the atheistic Jewish biologist is trying to tell him, like, no, there's a little depth to this, you know.
Well, Pinker would use the example of Jewish culture, where it's just, you know, the value of education or something that permeates Jewish culture, and it's nothing genetic. And, you know, someone else, if you know, so to say, if you were raised in Jewish culture, that you would have these characteristics also.
Yeah, maybe. I think it's probably a little bit of both. I don't have a hard opinion on like the genetic JQ or something, you know. And I'll keep the topics I touch on careful.
Even the Bible, ironically, has a pretty genetic deterministic view, and even you know, even based on the, so to say, the sins of the ancestors being constantly revisited upon the descendants, and you know, so, you know, like as someone who believes in the literal word of the prophets, clearly there's countless statements, at least in the Hebrew prophets, that talk about the almost you know, fated disposition of tribes to keep on following in the path of their ancestors based on possibly bad decisions that the founding member of that tribe made.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting with regard to the tendency of, like you mentioned, environment to influence temperament and temperamental genetics and stuff. I've always kind of felt, you know, when it comes to Middle Easterners and Jews and Arabs, that, you know, they've lived in this region that was sort of this boundary region for just, you know, tens of thousands of years, where there's enough abundance to survive and have thriving civilizations for a long period of time, but there's also a lot of want. There's you know, you're surrounded by deserts in these river valleys, and you had to be, you know, sometimes you couldn't be completely straightforward. You had to make sure you're not getting screwed over, because, you know, the harvest might fail. You know, it's not quite as simple as certain other regions of the world. I don't know. You know, I haven't put
Cold winter theory is not largely accepted. I mean, it has been postulated, but the cold winter theory for long-term planning is not you know, generally, like, I'm sure Pinker and other people would reject that.
I would guess so. Like I said, I haven't looked too deeply into that.
Now, how long have you been breeding geese?
Breeding geese? Oh, we've only had them reproduce once, but our duck population has exploded, so we have about 40 ducks now. So we're gonna have to start eating them.
For how long?
We got the geese. We got our first geese 2015.
So I mean, is it enough that you would recognize behavioral characteristics of different geese, or even look at them genetically to recognize that different ones have different personalities? Maybe some are more introverted or extroverted, or friendly or unfriendly, or however you determine it, and that overbreeding them for generations, where you could recognize that there's genetic characteristics to personality, or sometimes not, where you could have an introverted parent breed extroverted offspring.
Yeah, there are pretty stark differences. We have a Chinese male, which is Anser cygnoides. Cygnus is Latin for swans. It's the swan goose. That's its wild ancestor. And then Anser, which is the type species of the gray geese, is the gray-legged goose, which is European, and they're a lot more skittish. Whereas the Chinese geese are a lot more social, and they can be a little more aggressive too. But it kind of just goes hand in hand. Like, they want to interact with you, even if it's negative. You know what I mean? And they bred and made some hybrid offspring, and the offspring are somewhere in between. They're nowhere near as skittish as their mother, their European mother, but they're not aggressive like their Chinese father. So there's very discernible differences, but we are talking about two actual different species, not just different breeds. There are differences between the breeds. Basically, like all but two goose breeds come from the European species, and then two of them come from the Asian species, and that's the Chinese goose, which comes in brown and white, and then the African, which is not actually African in any respect, but it's just bigger, more timid, and has like a dewlap. But it's even with that, you can absolutely tell a temperamental difference. It's very, very apparent.
Well, maybe
So,
we do
yeah.
a stream a different time on goose breeding. You have anything related to like Ask
I'm sorry,
the Rabbi,
you asked me about it, and I can get on that. So I apologize. No, I was more curious about just your thoughts about linguistic history, because that's.
So maybe I'm going to go back to a screen share. If you guys want to stay on, you could mute, or
I can give the stream back to you if you've got some more material.
I'll put the link in the chat. So if you guys don't mind, I'm going to present a little bit more material.
Yeah, that's fine.
And then if you guys want, you could hop back on later.
I do not intend to hijack your stream to talk about geese. So.
Okay, you got anything else, Ecce? Okay, we're just mute, and I'm gonna re-enter screen share and try to show something. I don't know if Des is trying to post something. I can't seem to see it. So if you guys want to stay on, you just mute, and let me re-enter screen share. And so let me show some of this stuff. It's pretty interesting. This is a professor of linguistics. I think he's in Canada. He spent time in Israel. Isaac Mozeson. He's done a lot of work on this. Edenics, and on Facebook he's always putting these little things about the origins of words, trying to connect them to Hebrew, and he'll look at a word in Hebrew and then show connections between other languages. So here he's looking the Etruscan is not widely known today. There's a handful of known Etruscan words. What happened to the Etruscan people is not widely known, but there's a handful of words. So I guess here is these first words would be the Etruscan, and then he's trying to show the Hebrew connection to similar words. But he's got a whole bunch of these. Here, for example, is part. So he's looking at the word part in English is similar to a whole bunch of possible words, like offer is like a burnt offering. He's calling burnt fragments, and prat is something particular. So I'm going to give more, but he's constantly posting these things. He posts a few of these every day. Here's like faculty. So he's comparing that to the Hebrew word of pa'al, which means to do or make something happen, like factory. And there's certain historical linguistic things about how letters change over time. So like factory, so you have PA, like faculty. So it's a pretty connected structure, like P, ayin, lamed to faculty to pa'al, meaning to do in Hebrew. Versus like a full trace. Here's the Thai language, trying to show connections between language and Thai to Hebrew. Orthology, study of mountains, from the Greek word oros, which means mountain, and saying or is like the Hebrew har. And so he's got thousands of these on his Facebook. He just makes them as like little etymology type things. But I have some actual files. So let me show you. This one's particularly interesting. So this Edenic file all comes from Professor Mozeson, and anyone who knows much about word origin. So here's going to be an example of the connection between the Hebrew language and the Sanskrit language. So according to most current understandings, Sanskrit is significantly older than Hebrew, although, in the time of the Romans and the Christians, it seemed that the Jewish culture was much older than the other cultures in the area. But the evidence now would show that the cultures of the Far East are actually much older. So here is connections between Hebrew words and say which one came from which. So if anyone knows much about linguistics, at the beginning you have these like letter shifts in the ways that certain letters could change because they're formed in a similar pattern, like BFVW, CSTS, CKKQ, DTTS, LRMN. These are different letters that are more likely to switch from one to the other because they're made in similar parts of the mouth. So here's just similar letters, like Agni is the Hindu word for fire, for the Vedic god of fire. And in Hebrew, there's a word like Noga, means to glow. Ahimsa, which is similar to the word Hamas. Ahimsa means the in the beginning means not, without, and himsa means violence. So the word in Hebrew, Hamas, is in Arab also the Palestinian political party or classified according to the Jews in Israel in America as a terrorist party is called Hamas, which means violence. So the word himsa and Hamas, very similar. Akila means entire, similar to like kol in Hebrew. Anta, end boundary. So here's you got kitsa, to a little more of a stretch. Brahma, similar to the creator, similar to the Hebrew, like Bore, the creator, like in the first verse of the Bible, Bereshis Bora Elohim. Goat. So he's got whole lists of this stuff. Karma. Karma in Hebrew, there's a word goram, which means to cause. So similar structure. The G similar to the K, but the KRM similar to the GRM, and for karma, for goram, to cause. Krishna, which could refer to dark or black. So here you have in Hebrew Sachor, which is this one would have a different arranging of the letters. So you have the same letter structure, although they're ordered in a different way. Lila, like activities, could be like a lila, a deed. And this goes on and on. He's got quite a few. Shakti, people know like power of the universe. So in Hebrew, it could be like chazak, if people are familiar with that one. Sheila, rock, like Sela. Stupa, could be like Tzibor. So there's a whole bunch of these. I thought like the Sanskrit one's pretty interesting to me. So let me show a little bit more. So Professor Mozeson's expertise is in Slavic languages. So I guess you might probably, I don't know if how many people here are European, so that loads up. Let's see, degenerates, seen stuff, exact, they found where ancient Hebrew was derived. So just showing similarity between words isn't showing that words, the origin of it. To actually demonstrate that words come from another, you would have to have historical evidence in terms of artifacts. And there's a science of historiolinguistics of how, like the great vowel shift or these consonantal shifts, how they change over time. Well, Dan is a Hebrew tribe. So you say Nul Patix, talking about the tribe of Dan. And I don't see that Dan would be a Hebrew tribe, probably not the first Celts. It'd be one of the tribes of Japhet. So here are thousands of, this one's 150 pages, Slavic languages. And so you got like Papa, similar to like AB. So the P and B are, according to historical linguistics, the P is not far from the B. So Abba in Hebrew to Papa is similar. So here you have, Bosnian and Bulgarian is papa, in Czech is papas, in Macedonian it's papata, Serbian papas, Polish papias. I don't know if I'm pronouncing these right, but so he's got a whole series of these words, and from the Hebrew to show, so here you have Adam, which here means red, and so he's connecting red to dawn, because dawn, in the dawn when the sun comes out, it could be red. So here you have dan, which could be day, Bosnian, Bulgarian, den. So some of these are or zien, so the D could become like a Z in Belarusian and Polish for day. And here you have Adama here for land or territory. So here the shift, you would have the D becomes a Z. So in most of these Slavic languages, the word for land is the ZM structure, but according to the historical linguistics, it's close from a D could sometimes over time convert and become a Z. So in like the Uzimi in Czech, in Zem in Slavic, and Zeme or Belarusian Zimlia, Echad for one. So here you have Belarusian Adzin, the same thing with like the D becoming a Z, or also with a reversal of letters. So it's not directly the exact same structure, because it also includes a reversal of letters. But then in Bosnian Croatian, Czech, Polish, the Jidan is very similar to Echad, Jadini in Bosnian, single, slow, in a whole series of words. Ukrainian, someone, kitos. So anyone interested in this concept of Hebrew being the origin of all languages, Professor Mozeson has done a lot of research into this, and he's written books on it, and he puts these little things out. He has a web page. His specialty is Slavic languages, so here he has the most research, like ani. Here you have the N coming in M, so like me, me, mini, mene, and so here you have basically every Slavic language has a similar structure, very similar to the Hebrew. Here, afa means to bake, so here you have like pie, oven, in almost all the different Slavic languages. So this is just an example of Slavic languages where you see Hebrew words very similar to like arucha, to cure, and then you have Slavic language like doctor, and Bulgarian, Macedonian, Polish, lakar means doctor, or Russian, lakar could be a healer. So if this is interesting to people, and we're just on A, like there's 150 pages of this stuff. So I'm not sure if I'm losing people in the chat. And so this is private material. So Edenics, I'll put the link to Professor Moseson's page on, but this is actually his private research files. It's not published. He has some of this stuff on his webpage, where he's got charts listed. So this is more, hopefully I recruit to be like his assistant, because like I studied languages and would be able to help him, although Slavic languages is his expertise. So here is his webpage called Edenics, and there's a few videos, and then he's got a blog where he has a whole bunch of these posts, but he gave me the complete file of he probably has more than he gave me, but he's got lists of these separately. Like he doesn't have these publicly listed. I hope he wouldn't be upset at me for showing him this, because he's a scholar. He has published books that he tries to sell, but I think he does want to forward the research. And this type of research, you'd need people who know so many different languages. Here is, let's look at, I don't even know what Amarin. So here's an example of a Native American language, 20 pages of just common words between a Native American language, like bat, boa, different words. So I mean, he's collected together thousands of pages of this stuff. So I guess these are some native tribe. I have to look into Amarin where this is. Collecting of different sound systems for different native languages. And then, so he's got a lot of research. Let me see if I find something other interest. Maybe the animal charts are also interesting. There's a lot of different things. So here would be examples of a Hebrew word for an animal. So here would be, he would call the Edenics. So in the Bible, Adam names the languages, that Adam gives names to all the languages from around the world. And that in theory is like the essence, like Plato's form, that according to the Bible, the Hebrew name that Adam gave the language is the essential form of the language. So Tzipor is the generic form for bird in Hebrew. And I think that comes actually in the Bible in Genesis, that Adam names the word tzipor. Could be like the most common sparrow, tzipor to English and sparrow. But you could look here like in Afrikaans, the word for bird, sprue. And here you have all over. So not just like Afrikaans, which is a Germanic language, Arabic, as for Bosnian, Bulgarian, Dutch, Estonian, Farsi. So here's just 20 pages of these word lists. So here's dog, for example. Caleb means dog, but you might have fox, and here you have like Inu in Northern Japanese, and you show like the different historical linguistics of how letters get changed, or sometimes you've changed, or even letters get flipped. But these are interesting. These would be trying to compare not all the world languages. So here, cattle, for example, in the Hebrew is bakar, and there, Chinese, gabu, which you have to see the shift, and like how professor would explain that the letters got shifted where it's a similar meaning. But you see he's collected together hundreds of different languages and trying to show the similarity to Hebrew. So this is some research that if I had time, God willing, I would do more research in, and I would like to be able to continue. Like I'm constantly doing other things, and this is very interesting to me. That's what I wanted to stream on from a religious aspect. There is this concept that, if Judaism is true and the biblical narrative is true, it should be that, yes, Hebrew is in fact the origin of all languages, and the current science of linguistics would tend to point to that. But, Professor Moseson's a professor of linguistics and's collected together a lot of this, and he's worked together with other people, and he's tried to recruit me to be able to help him. I speak a few different languages, but it's something I'm interested in. I wanted to put it out there. So I'll put the link back in the chat and go back for some more open discussion. Otherwise, that's all the material I had to cover in this Ask the Rabbi of Hebrew is the origin of all languages. It's something to think about, from the theological perspective, the importance of speaking Hebrew. The Kabbalists actually say you shouldn't speak Hebrew as a colloquial language. I studied under Rev. Daniel Frisch, and he always told me don't speak Hebrew because the power of prayer, Hebrew should be reserved only for prayer, not for colloquial use. So the question, like, did the ancients, was Hebrew always a language? And there's books on Sanskrit. I have a book on like Sanskrit's role in Latin also possibly as a religious language. So I'm going to put the link in the chat if anyone has questions. I don't know if Cassandra, if you actually want to come on the stream and address your questions, or if you've never streamed before. And if there's no more questions, I might just call it a night, or if no one's going to take the link. So I'll also show yeah, I mean, Google is pretty much censoring a lot of what you're saying, Cassandra. So let me show something else in the screen share. I have two more Ask the Rabbis, maybe three coming up that I think will be pretty interesting and directly related. And I collected together. So here's some interesting research on the role of the difference between Jews and non-Jews, or the concept of like goy and not goy. Here's also like Paul and the invention of the Gentiles. Professor Christine Hayes of Yale, and the complicated goy and classical rabbinic literature. So maybe a whole stream on the origin of this concept of a goy. And I have a bunch of papers. I haven't been able to read through these, but I just collected them. So I'll try to read through these and get the top scholarship. And so I have a whole thing on reincarnation. So this would be the Hebrew interpretation of reincarnation, show the verses, the rabbinic literature, the theology, and I've collected together quite a few expert papers on it, and the soul and the afterlife, and some of these are huge books. Like this one's a whole 200-page books, and it goes through historical mentions of reincarnation in the earliest collections of known historical how the concept of reincarnation has changed in Jewish belief. And so that's a stream this Ask the Rabbi number 9. So you could have 10, 11, and 12 there. 10 the goy. What's the history of the word goy and the differentiating between Jews and non-Jews, and we'll look in the early Christian history of where Christianity separates for being a religion for non-Jews from originally being a religion of Jews, to the concept of reincarnation, and also the concept of the soul. So we have simple Maimonides 8 chapters where he talks about his understanding of the soul and its faculties. Here's more Maimonides. This was an interesting collection comparing the different sages' conception of what's the nature of a Jewish soul versus a non-Jewish soul. Load this up. So here's also early conception. What was the conception of the soul in the time of the Bible as opposed to Kabbalah today. So here's a full 700-page book. Going through history. I'll probably read this, but I'll put it in the chat for people who want to know more about these concepts. So here's a full 700-page book on the Hebrew origins of the soul. Here's a linguistic approach to the different Hebrew words and terminology. So these are research I'm doing. I have the Rabbi Ginsburg event, the one that Adam Green is always talking about, and I got his book on his conception of the soul, and so that's something I hope to look into and do a Ask the Rabbi. So there you probably got Ask the Rabbi 10, 11, and 12. Hey, Hypatia, thanks for joining. I was listening to a lecture on let me show of the teaching company. I listen to basically all the teaching company. I have a lot of knowledge from the teaching company, and I've listened to well over 500 of these. So I'm constantly listening to them, and they just had a recent one on women. Let me see. I have it on my phone. Let me see what it's called. So one of the it was on 36 famous women, and one of the lectures is on Hypatia of Alexandria, who I guess is the patron saint of. So this one's warriors, queens, and intellectuals. So I'll just pop this up. So I had heard of Hypatia, when she was saying it, I forgot the name, and the Hypatia of Alexandria. like is an interesting character. So let me get this up. Sorry, no one's joining the call. So warriors, queens, and intellectual. This is the most recent course. Professor Joyce Salisbury. Some of these were very interesting, like Pompeia and the persecution of the Christians in ancient Israel. And where's Hypatia? Lecture 12, Hypatia. Look at the brilliant and controversial scholar Hypatia. She lived, taught, and died in Alexandria in the middle of the 5th century. Her role as a public intellectual and philosopher would make her a rare example of respected female scholarship in a male-dominated world, and would ultimately lead to her murder at the hands of an angry Christian mob. So I think I'm actually on like lecture 18. I just finished lecture 17. A lot of these are pretty interesting. But I'd heard of Hypatia of Alexandria, so whoever you are, props for that name. Good choice of the name, like the patron saint of in these days of censorship too. The censorship of the sciences. So definitely props. Good name, good handle. I'm going to put the link in the chat one more time, and if not, I'm going to call it a night. Maybe I'll quickly sing Elijah the Prophet song, because it is after Sabbath. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishri, Eliyahu Hagiladi, Bimera Yavonuleni, Imashiach Ben Doooovid, Eliyahu Hanavi. Eliyahu Hatishri, Eliyahu Agiladi, Bimhera Yavoni Guleni Mishiach Ben Doooovid. Yeah, Brundle was asking about Chabad. Maybe I'll save that for a different stream if Adam wants to stream. Like, I'm hoping to get to 1,000 viewers. So first, for the Democratic debates coming up Tuesday and Wednesday, there's going to be some big protest and big action outside. I was discussing with Ecce. So I'm not sure if I get any subscribers while I was doing this. So if you do watch my content regularly and you want to subscribe, I would appreciate that. So that I'll be able to live stream at the debates. I'm currently up to 957, so I need about 40 more subscribers by Tuesday. So I hope to make that. I'll probably stream with Church of Entropy, do some outside interviews and show the protest happening on the street. I guess maybe Super High Tea. I like Bernie, honestly. Like, Bernie seems incompetent with money. So, like, I don't know how good of a actual legislator or bureaucrat he would be. But I do kind of like Bernie, and I do want to go outside and do interviews. I'm more conservative, right-leaning. However, the debates are here in Detroit, so it's going to be a big thing. There's going to be all these protests outside, so I just thought it'd make for a good stream, regardless of my opinions, and just go out there asking interviews on the street. I'm not sure if Jake Turks. I'm going to message Jake Turks before I sign off, and see if he's coming to Michigan. So Jake Turks, the White House Orthodox reporter, is possibly going to be covering so just message him and ask him if he would appear on my YouTube for an interview. So see if I get a response from Jake Turks. And I'm a man of God. I don't even vote. like the politics is just a good excuse to have discussions. So I don't have anyone blocked on my channel. I gave out a few wrenches recently, and hopefully the wrenches I gave to people are from people that are not going to use them to block people, but so they could post links. So thank God I have 0 people blocked. I have a more karmatic, even Cassandra there, super high T. Some of your comments get automatically blocked by Google, not by me. So I have no one on a ban list. Google does a good enough job blocking comments. Occasionally I'll overwrite it in show. So I may have just, God forbid, just to show what's going on here. Let me present to everyone real quick. So, here's my chat. So Cassandra, you can see Google, I could override and show what you're trying to say. But so quite a few of Cassandra's. Super High T also has some, censorship going on from Google. Cassandra, a lot of censorship going on. So I would suggest being more careful in the choice of words in order to not cause my channel or yourself problems with censorship. Cassandra says Hypatia doesn't know anything about her namesake from Alexandria. Good handle either way. I don't know. I got you two fighting in my chat over Hypatia. I don't know that much about the history. Like I'd known briefly, like I think she was the daughter of a famous scientist. She built one of these water pressure sensors, and some of her theories, they say Copernicus relied on possibly some of the theories of Hypatia, how she got killed or whatever. It's just an interesting handle. I like history, I don't know, like Hypatia on the Jews. Like, did Hypatia have Jewish friends in Alexandria at the time? I don't know. It'd be an interesting, I might even Google that real quick, just Hypatia and the Jews. So, just a Wikipedia. I guess I got to go back to, keep on going back to screen share. So, just an interesting Hypatia and the Jews. So, Cyril closed all the synagogues in Alexandria, confiscated property belonging to the Jews, and expelled them from the city in 414. So Hypatia dies in 415, so she would have been alive in the time of so Orestes, who I guess carried out that order, was a convert to Christianity. He was outraged by Cyril's action and sent a scathing report to the empire. The conflict escalated and a riot broke out, and a group of Christian clerics under Cyril's authority nearly killed Orestes. As a punishment, Orestes and Ammonius, the monk who had started the riot, publicly tortured to death. Cyril tried to proclaim Ammonius a martyr, but Christians in Alexandria were disgusted since Ammonius had been killed for inciting a riot and attempted to murder the governor, not for his faith. Prominent Alexandria Christians intervened and forced Cyril to drop the matter. Nonetheless, Cyril's feud with Orestes continued. Orestes frequently consulted Hypatia for advice because she was well liked among both the pagans and the Christians alike. She had not been involved in any previous stages of the conflict, and she had an impeccable reputation as a wise counselor. Despite Hypatia's popularity, Cyril and his allies attempted to discredit her and undermine her reputation. So, did she know the Jews or not? So, she's Christian friendly, but it seems unclear whether Hypatia actually, she dies a year after the expulsion of the Jews. So it's unclear whether Hypatia had Jewish friends or was Jewish friendly or not. So let me see if the Britannica has anything on this. So I guess the Jews probably lived separately. So it's unclear what Hypatia's opinion. So according to this Hypatia here, this is the Britannica. So the feud escalated during the year 414 to 15. Orestes formed his own political party. He was backed by the Jewish leaders who remained in the city, government officials who were moderate Christians like himself and Alexandria League, including Hypatia. She supported the Jewish resistance against Cyril and believed in a government based on civil discourse rather than violence. She was amicable with city officials who sought her advice and entertained them in her home. She had powerful allies all over the empire and a slew of civic honors. By contrast, Cyril was unwanted and disliked. So according to this, Hypatia was a defender of the Jews. So at the time, I'm not sure if this, how accurate this is. I'll put this in the chat. So you have an interesting element. Was Hypatia martyred for her defense of the Jews? What do you think there, Cassandra? Is it possible that Hypatia was martyred for her defense of the Jewish people? So it's interesting. Hypatia did have according to some, I have to look more research. She did have Jewish friends, and she did oppose the expulsion of the Jews from Alexandria, and that possibly led to her death with Orestes, who tried to overthrow Cyril, who was trying to expel the Jews, that she teamed up with the person who favored the Jews. So that's definitely something that could use a little bit more research. So just interesting, cool name. So I don't know what your background is, but if that would fit where you're just a lover of intellect and free flow of ideas, and you might happen to have a few Jewish friends, but would oppose the expulsion of the Jews or whatever. So random, interesting. So I guess that's the last time. Put the link in the chat. Do I have a good Hebrew song to sing? So let me see a quick Hebrew song. This is from Song of Songs, chapter 5. Hichoimam takim, hichoimam takim, hiloi makmadim, zedoidi v'zerei, zedoidi I forget the words of that one. That was a good tune. May I do my favorite tune this song before I sign off. I did it, yeah, my, yeah. I did it, yeah. I did it, yeah. 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 I did it, my, yeah. I did it, my, yeah. I did it, I did it, I did it, I did it, This tune, my Rebbe, the Sklener Rebbe, used to sing Saturday nights before the Havdalah ceremony. Ya ma 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 ya ya did I ya hoy ya did I die did I die did I ya ay ya Ay, 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 did I, I might be I haven't heard these songs in years, but they had all these great tunes, kind of like a slow march when we first ate. I used to stay up and chant Saturday nights after Sabbath and chant late into the night, and we'd start with this yam bum 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 bum. Ya nine 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 nine. Ya da day day day. Dum day 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 dum. Yeah, I'm forgetting these tunes, but so I'm all alone here in Detroit, streaming, no one to chant with. So you guys fight over the true Hypatia history. I'm trying to recall some of my favorite tunes. Maybe Psalm 42. I've done this one quite a few times. So I'll put the link in the chat if someone wants to come in while I sing Psalm. This one, the Rebbe also used to chant right before Havdalah without tunes, but the song popular was to the last verses of Psalm 42. Ma tishtoichechi nafshi umatahem Elai. Why are you downtrodden? Why don't you have hope? Hachoili lailukim kioid oidani Yeshua's panav vailokai. Turn your face towards God. Have hope and salvation that God will save us. Ma'atishtoichechi nafshi imatehem Elai. Ma'atishtoichechi nafshi imatehem Elai. Oh, I liking. I liking. Ki ahoy dani. Yeshios panavai like I. Oh, I liking. I liking. Ki ahoy dani. Yeshios panavai like I. Ma'atishtoichechi nafshi imatehem Elai. Ma'atishtoichechi nafshi imatehem Elai. Oy liking. Oy liking. Ki ahoy dani. Yeshias panavai like I. Oy liking. Oy liking. Ki ahoy dani. Yeshias panavai like I actually have that one on my YouTube channel. That one has over 500 views. It's one of my YouTube channels. I have another. This one is also sung Saturday night live on Saturday night. This one actually has over 2,000 views. This one's one of the more popular ones. This is a live recording from Jerusalem. Over 2,400 views. Yaskus Avois Yugan Eleni Netzach Yisrael Mitzrenu Gilenu Umives Gulos Delenu Vilenu Lenetzach all Malechus base. I think I have the words to that incorrectly put on, but this is from a certain verses that are said after at the end of Sabbath from Kelmastater. So I'm actually going to correct my video while I'm doing this. So I put the video in the chat. One of my 10 most popular videos is this chanting, and I have a live version. Back then, I was recording this from a tape recorder. This was in the late 90s when I was in Jerusalem, recorded from a tape recorder. Yaski suvais, skis yugonoleni, skis suvais, yogain yoganoleni, yaski suvais, skis suvais yoganoleni. Ski suvais, yogain ileni. Ahoy, Netzach Yisroel, Mitzora seining go aleini, umives galois deleni realeini. Ahoy, Netzach Yisroel, Mitzara seining go aleini, umives gulois deleni ve'aleini, limnatseach, Limnatseach Amalekites Beis Hashem. That one was one of my favorite tunes. Like I never heard that once sung here in Detroit, but it's one of my more popular views on YouTube. As said, that one has 2,400 views. Related to the language thing, this one's also. This one comes from the High Holiday prayers, but there's the concept of Israel being above all the languages. Atu b'chartanu mikol amim, you, God, chose us from all the nations. Mikol lashonos, from all the languages, and sanctified us with his commandments. But the mention of languages, that we were chosen from all the languages. Atu b'chartanu mikol amim, Atu orsanu v'rasitza banu, Raimam tom mikol lashonos. Atu. Okay, so I guess that's all I got. Cassandra, Hypatia, everybody, thanks for joining. Hope this was a good stream, and hopefully people will be able to work out their difficulties and we'll be able to move forward. I showed you a lot of the research that I'd like to be working on, some of the stuff that's coming in the near future, my stream on the Jew-Gentile difference, historical, biblical, Talmudic approach, and the Christianity differentiation, where Christian becomes a religion for non-Jews. And I'm going to do one on Judaism and reincarnation, and one on Judaism and the soul. What's the Jewish conception of the soul? So that should be interesting. So Red Skull was mentioning is Aramaic younger than Hebrew. So I mean, from the concept here, actually, some of the Hebrew sages thought that Aramaic, Jesus likely spoke Aramaic. Some of the Hebrew sages in the Talmud thought that Aramaic was actually the pre-Babel language, in the language that the world was created in, that Hebrew was a special language of prayer, or the Abrahamic Aber people. And so even in the Talmud, there was an opinion that Aramaic was the original language. Peyton, hopefully be coming on in the future. But I mean, from a perspective of historical linguistics, I think Aramaic was likely the language of Babylon. They had multiple different languages. So there's a language that was most commonly spoken in the empire. They had a language of business, and possibly a separate language like the priestly class used, like Akkadian and Sumerian. But generally, Aramaic was the most popular language in the Middle East. I'm not sure the archaeological data to answer that. Okay, so I appreciate everyone coming on. I guess no one's taking the chat link, so I'm going to sign off, and God bless everybody. See you tomorrow on Church of Entropy's Week in Review. And so anyone who wants to come on, that's also a good stream. The Week in Review has been very beneficial to people to move forward. I think we might be having some streams together, maybe possibly on Dayananda Swami's The Eternal Truth, the Satya Path, forget the Sanskrit name for his book, and possibly a debate on logical proofs for God. And I think she might be on Halsey this week also. I guess Super T, if you're going to come out, I'll put the link in the chat. I put it in multiple times. So I'll do one more link in the chat. I don't know if High T has ever been on one of these. So here's the Hangout link. If last chance, I was just about to end the stream. 25 viewers. I got quite a few viewers. I don't know if they're here just for the blood sports between Cassandra and Hypatia in the chat, or if they're actually listening to me. Maybe I'll do one more song. This one of my personal favorite. I got to go get the words for this one to make sure I have it right. I think I'm going to do a Hindu chant for Week in Review. I think next week I'm going to do a Hindu chant. So I'd been thinking about doing this one. And this one was supposedly written by Rav Chaim Volozhiner, the student of the Vilna Gaon, Chad Yasmin Yisroel V'askin Besimchas Torah Kidja Brichi Oimer Lepamalia Delay Chazu B'nei Chavivi Demishtachmin Ditzar Delay V'askin Bechedvasa Delay. And it's like the praise of Israel that sits and learns Torah, divine wisdom. The Holy One, blessed be He, is delighted in seeing his children, that despite our suffering, that we're occupy ourselves in these subjects, possibly in the spirit of like Hypatia. Okay, we're suffering, we're going through all these material difficulties. But despite that, we're taking our spare time and dedicating it towards divine studies. Chad Yasmin Yisroel V'askin V'simchas HaTorah. Chad Yasmin Yisroel V'askin V'simchas HaTorah. Kidja Brichi Oimar Lepamalia Delay. Kidja Brichi Oimar Lepamalia Delay. Kazu bunai chavive. Kazu bunai chavive. Demishtachrim b'tzar delay. V'askin b'chedvus delay. Demishtachrim b'tzar delay. V'askin b'chedvus delay. That's a good song. Saying despite all the troubles in the material world we might be facing, that we put time aside and dedicate it towards spiritual advancement. Goose asked me about Hinduism. I could classify myself as a Hindu. I follow the basic tenets of Hinduism. Whether like worshiping deities, I don't think it's a contradiction. I could be a Jew, even a Hasidic Jew, and a Hindu at the same time. We could talk about that more in the future. But yes, I think like you don't have to worship idols. Even like the Hare Krishnas, that you do have deity worship and idol worship and bow to them, would classify themselves as monotheists. Although, like, I'm not a Hare Krishna priest, I don't like serve in the temples and worship their deities. But possibly even that could be within the bounds of Judaism. But certainly the philosophy, there's no contradiction in the general philosophy of Hinduism. And Hinduism is kind of like the generic spirituality of the world, Sanatana Dharma. I'm a big proponent of it. I would like to have more streams in the future about Hinduism. And I guess I still got people. I'm going to keep on chanting. So let me do Psalm 32. This one's the Psalm 32. No, but I'm sorry, Psalm 33. Am I missing something? Sorry, I'm not confused. I got to find these Hebrew words. So I guess people are still here. I'll keep on chanting. Okay, it's Psalm 34. I'm sorry. Psalm 34, verse 2, 3, and 4. Vorchas Hashem b'kol eitz. I will bless the Lord at all times. Tamid tisalu b'fi. His praise is constantly on my lips. B'shem tisalu nafshi. My soul will glorify God. Yismu anovim yismachi. The humble shall hear thereof and be glad. Gadli ladoinai iti. Magnify the Lord with me, and let us exalt his name together. Romu shmo yagdov. Avorchu es Hashem b'kaleis. Red Skull, real quick. No, the Book of Maccabees is not canonized according to most Jews. Some people study it. Some people even say it's forbidden to read. Avorchu es Hashem b'kaleis. Tamid tisalil b'fi. Avorchu es Hashem b'kaleis. Tamid tisalil b'fi. B'Hashem tisalil nafshi. Yismu anovim yismachi. Gadli Lashem iti. Uraimu mushma yagdav. Gadli Lashem iti. Uraimu mushma yagdav. And I guess because people stuck through this, I'll give a blessing to everybody who watched. So Psalm 21, verse 5, I've sung this in the past. This was one of my favorite ones. Chaim shul mimchu nasatu loy orek yomim oilam voed. We ask life from thee, God. Give it to us. Extend our days forever and ever. Gadol kavoidoi b'shuasaku. Great should be the glory and salvation. Hoid v'hodar d'shaveh of law. Honor and majesty shall be laid upon you. So this is my blessing to everybody who watched my stream, that you should be honored with life, long life, given to you. Honor, greatness, salvation, majesty. Chaim shuel mimchu nu satuloi oirek Oirik Yamim Li'olam V'Oed Chaim Shu'al Mimchu Nu Satulai Oirik Yamim Oilam V'Oed Gudal Kivai Dai B'Shiyusachu Hoid V'Hadar Tishavei Yula Gudal Kivai Dai B'Shiyusachu Hoid V'Hadar Tishavei Yula Chaim Shu'al Mimchu Nu Satulai Oirik Yavamim Oilam V'Oed Chaim Shu'al Mimchu Nu Satulai Oirik Yamim Oilam V'Oed Gudal Kivai Dai B'Shiyusachu Hoid V'Hadar Tishavei Yula. Okay, so that's Doooovid's blessing for all of you from Psalm 42. All of you should be blessed with glory, long lives, peace, splendor. Okay, people are still watching. I guess I'll do Psalm 42, verse 2 and 3. Kyle taroig olafike mayim. Just as a baby deer looks for water on the brook, Kain nafshi sarog alecha Elohim. So too does my soul thirst for God. Samu nafshi lelohim. My soul thirsts for God, the El Chai, the living God. Musai avoy. When shall I come, ve'erea pnei Elohim, and appear before the face of God? So I think there was a question in the chat about God anthropomorphism. So the sages understand the Bible speaks in the language of man. So, like this song, we talk about, seeing the face of God. It's an anthropomorphic term that's used in Scripture, but generally we're impersonal and think that God has no form. So it's just an anthropomorphic term used in Scripture to understand God. But yes, despite of all the difficulties we face in life, my true thirst and hunger is for God, spirituality. That is what I'm seeking after. Olafi mayim kevavei nafshi sarog elecho Elohim ki ayil taroi olafi kemayim kevavei nafshi Sarog Elechu, Elechu Elohim. Itzamu nafshi, Leilahim. Musai, Musai, Ovoy Vereya, Pneya Elohim, Itzamu nafshi, Elohim. Musai, Musai, Savoy Veerea, B'nai Elohim. That's a Vishnitz tune for anyone who knows Hasidus. Told Sovereign Yitzchak Rebbe used to sing that one. And let me find one more since I'm enjoying the chanting here. This was another Sklen tune. This comes from, to look this one up, Psalm 69. Psalm 69, verse 14. Va'ani tefilasi l'chu Hashem eitz ritzayin Elokim barov chazdecha aneni b'yemesh yishecha. But as for me, let me pray unto the Lord in an acceptable time. O God, in the abundance of thy mercy, answer me with the truth of thy salvation. V'yani, v'yani. Red Skull. I don't have much of an opinion on Judas Iscariot. I mean, he's a character in the Bible, the historical character, or, like his, no comment on that one. Ani veyani. Svila silechu Hashem. Svila silechu Hashem, Eitz Ratzain, Elohim, Elohim, B'rav chazdechu, Aneni, Aneni, Beyemes Yishechu, Yani, V'yani, Svila, Silechu Hashem, Svila, Silechu Hashem, Eitz Ratzon, Elohim, Elohim, Berov chazdechu, Aneni, Aneni, Beyemes Yishechu. Okay, this is Psalm 136, verse 23 and 24. Who remembers us in our low estate, have mercy that endures forever and ever, and who has delivered us from our adversaries, have mercy that endures forever and ever. Shef Shaleni Zucher Luni. The verse has Kilam Kazdo, but we don't sing that part in this song. V'yifracheni mitzarenu. So he remembered us in our lowly estate and delivered us from our adversaries. The next verse they're not going to sing. No son lechem l'kol basar, who gives food to all flesh. Shef shalini zocher luni v'yifracheni mitzareni Shef shalini zocher luni v'yifracheni mitzareni I'm not remembering that one as well as I thought. Okay, let's look at Psalm 56. Psalm 56, verse 12 and 11 and 12. 12 and 13. By Elohim batakti loy ira ma yase adam li ulai Elohim nerecha shalom toidos lach. In God I trust. I will not be afraid. What can man do unto me? Or I don't fear whatever man does to me. The vow are upon me. O God, I will render thanksgiving unto thee. Your nice verse just saying, I trust in God. I don't fear man. I make an oath to God to pay God back for all the kindness, regardless of what you have blood transfusions. I'm not like a rabbi in that sense. Like there are different rabbis who have different opinions. Generally, Judaism is a pro-life religion in terms that you should choose life. So unlike Jehovah's Witness, the Jews would be more likely to accept blood transfusions in medical things like that because you should do living as a commandment. Only like idol worship or sexual immorality or killing someone else is something a person should give away. I don't really have any interest in Hypatia and Cassandra's personal grievance. So I'm glad you're enjoying my channel now, but I'm not going to step in between your beef. By Elohim Butakti. Lo wo 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 ira maya se dabavamli by Elohim Butakti. Lo wo 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 ira maya se damli ulai Elohim nedorechu Shalom, shalom, shalom tov, voidois lach, ulai Elohim nedorechu. Shalom, shalom, shalom tov, voidois lach. Okay. Let me look for one more one here. Maybe I'll sing a tune while I'm looking for this verse in Isaiah. Dee die da da die die dee die da da die die yai nai 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 na 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 mahoy. Ay yai da da die 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 da da die die dee die die nai nai na na na. I nine 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 nine. I nine 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 e die 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 da da da. I nine 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 me die 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 da da da. Mahoy. I nine 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 ya ya da 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 ya my ya 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 ya. Okay, so here it is. Psalm. This is from Isaiah 25:9. V'yomer ba'yom hahu hine Eloheinu zeh kavinu loi v'yoshienu zeh Adonai kavinu loi negila v'nisvacha v'shu asoi. And he will say on that day, behold, this is our God. We have hope for him, and he would save us. This is God. We have hope for him. We shall rejoice and be glad in his salvation. This is the God that I call to, that one day will redeem me. This is actually a Satmar. People know the Satmar Hasidic group. This tune comes from the Satmar Hasidic group, and you can see videos of them singing it, very popular. V'yoma v'yoma v'yomahu v'yoma v'yomahu Hine Elokaini zeh 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 kivini loi v'yoshiani Oy zeh Hashem kivini loi zeh Hashem kivini loi Nagila, Nagila, V'nismecha v'shiyusa, Yai, 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 Zeh Hashem kavini loi, Zeh Hashem kavini loi, Nagila, Nagila, V'nismecha v'shiyusa, V'yoma, v'yoma, v'yomahu, v'yoma, v'yomahu. Hine Elokaini zeh 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 kavini loi v'yoshiani. V'yoma, v'yoma, v'yomahu, v'yoma, v'yomahu. Hine Elokaini zeh 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 kavini loi v'yoshiani. Oy zeh Hashem kavini loi, zeh Hashem kavini loi, Nagila, Nagila, v'nismecha v'shiyusa. Try one more. This one is from Moses, Deuteronomy 4:4. V'yatamid veikim b'Adonai Elohechem chaim kilchem hayoim. You who cling to Hashem, our God, are all alive today. V'yatem ad veikim b'Shem Elohechem chaim chaim kilchem chaim kilchem hayoim. V'yatem ad veikim b'Shem Elohechem chaim chaim kilchem chaim kilchem hayoim. This one actually goes very high, but my tune is a little bit off. I don't think I have it. So these words come from the Arizal, Askinesidisa. Prepare for the feast of perfect faith, the joy of the Holy King. Prepare for the feast of the King. This is the feast of David, the anointed king. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, come feast with him. David, King of Israel, lives and endures. May a good sign and good fortune come to us and to all of Israel. Amen. Skinnissa, Deamusa, Shlemisa, Chedvisa, Demalka Kadisha, Skinnissa, Demalka, Dahi Siddisa, the Doooovid, Malcolm Shichai. Ahoy! Avram Yitzchak veYakov, Skinnissa, Chedvika. Doooovid Melech Yisrael, Chai v'Chayam, Siman Tov v'Mazel Tov, Yehei Luni, Yuvakal Yisrael. So this song's actually in Aramaic, these words, Askinisitasa, Dehiminasa, Shlemasa, prepare the feast of perfect face. That's Aramaic, not Hebrew. Askinisitasa, Dame Nusa, Shlemisa, Chedvisa, Demalka Kadisha, Skinnissa, Demalka, Dahi Siddisa, the Dove Malcolm Shichai. Ahoy, Avram Yitzchak Yaakov, Asnisad V'Hedei. Doooovid Melech Yisrael, Chai v'Chayam, Siman Tov v'Mazel Tov, Siman Tov, Yehei Luni, v'Kal Yisrael. So here's another one about Jacob. Is say Abraham wasn't a Jew. The first Jew is Jacob. So this one is a bunch of verses that end with Altire Avde Yaakov. And probably based on Psalm 44, which Tzave Yeshuas Yaakov Altire Avde Yaakov. Tzave Yeshuas Yaakov. Tzave Yeshuas Yaakov. Tzave Yeshuas Yaakov. Tzave Yeshuas Yaakov. There's a lot of good songs that we're singing at the end of Sabbath at this time tonight. But okay, so now is officially the end. So thanks everyone for joining. Appreciate people tuning in. If you're not subscribed to my channel, please subscribe. And so I'll hit the 1,000 subscribers soon and be able to live stream. Tune in for a different time. Thanks for everyone in the chat for the questions. I guess Ecce and Plasma and Goose Bear for joining in. And till the next time, see you tomorrow. If anyone catch in Church of Entropies, weekend for your blessings, everyone. Thanks.